Hey guys, tonight we drift into the wide open steppe, where the grass ripples like an endless sea, and every gust of wind smells faintly of horses, leather, and fires that never truly go out. You're standing there, blinking into the morning haze, and before you can even process what time zone your dreams dropped you into, a messenger on a sturdy Mongol pony stops inches from your toes. He doesn't say much, just points at you like you're the chosen one in a medieval cooking show, and informs you, very casually, that the Great Khan expects you to help feed him tonight. No pressure or anything. Just the ruler of the largest contiguous empire in history waiting for supper, and you're somehow part of the kitchen staff now. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least you'll stay warm near the fire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your fen, location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through the short grass, its dew soaking into your boots as the messenger gallops off, apparently done with his motivational pep talk. Ahead of you, the Mongol camp sprawls across the plain like a living organism. Hundreds of yurts in circular clusters, smoke rising lazily from their roof vents, and horses tied to lines that look like someone drew them with a ruler. Everything feels both chaotic and perfectly organized, like they built a city but forgot to tell gravity it shouldn't work this smoothly. You step between yurts that look deceptively small on the outside, but can fit entire families, piles of tools, and at least one cranky goat that eyes you suspiciously. The air smells of burning dung, yes, that's a real historical detail. You can't conquer half the world without some creative fuel choices. Historians still argue whether the Mongols preferred horse manure or cow dung for fires, but based on tonight's bouquet, you're leaning toward all of the above. As you walk, you notice just how alive the place feels. Kids chase each other between tethered horses, women stir huge cauldrons, their spoons long enough to double as self-defense tools. Men check saddles, braid ropes, or repair arrows. Everyone moves with purpose, as if they all know exactly where to be, except, unfortunately, you. A shepherd waves at you from a cluster of sheep that look strangely fluffy for animals destined to become stew. He gestures toward the center of the camp, where the Great Khan's imperial yurt sits like a massive pale dome. The thing is enormous, its felt walls gleaming in the rising sun, its entrance decorated with war trophies, silk banners, and the general vibe of VIP lounge but for conquerors. As you draw closer, you notice the subtle details. Guards in lamella armor, their bows slung across their backs, horses that look like they could outrun your monthly cardio routine without even blinking, servants bustling in and out with baskets of food, jars of milk, and bundles of firewood. You're starting to understand that feeding the Khan isn't just a matter of throwing meat in a pot, it's an entire operation. And because fate has a sense of humor, one of the stewards pulls you aside with a grin that says, "Welcome to the team, you lucky soul." He hands you a wooden ladle nearly as long as your arm. You hold it like you just received a noble relic, though it's really more of a try not to burn yourself later tool. The steward explains that tonight's feast needs to celebrate the return of a hunting party, honor several visiting merchants, and satisfy the Khan's famously unpredictable appetite. No big deal. Just a logistical nightmare that has to look effortless. As you walk deeper into the camp with him, he explains something fascinating. The Mongols, despite their reputation for constant movement, were surprisingly good at food logistics. They traveled with portable pantries, wagons stacked with dried meat, nuts, spices, and fermented dairy, a sort of medieval food truck convoy. The steward even jokes that if the Mongols had invented plastic containers, the world might have fallen even faster. You pass a group of women churning airag fermented mare's milk using goat hide bags hung from tripods. They swing the bags rhythmically, like giant pendulums, while humming low tunes that blend beautifully with the camp's morning sounds. You get the sense you'll be drinking some of that later, whether you're ready or not. Then there's the quirky detail you can't unsee. A pair of cooks arguing over the exact number of onions required for tonight's stew. One insists it must be 7, because 7 brings good fortune, while the other claims fortune, prefers numbers divisible by 4. Historians still argue whether Mongol cooking had any strict numerology behind it, but based on this conversation, superstition definitely plays a role. A breeze brushes across your face, carrying flecks of ash, and the faint smell of boiling broth. It's strangely calming, like an early invitation to a feast that hasn't yet begun. You feel yourself slip deeper into the rhythm of the camp, moving from the confusion of accidental responsibility to the steady pulse of a world that feeds itself with remarkable harmony. Somewhere behind you, a horse snorts loudly as if judging your walking pace, and you quicken your steps. The steward laughs softly, telling you not to worry. "If you can stir a pot without falling into it," he says, "you'll be fine." You have doubts, but you follow him anyway. You keep moving through the camp, the felt walls of the yurts forming soft curves that catch the morning light like low, rounded hills. Smoke snakes, lazily upward from countless roof vents, drifting into a sky so open it feels like it could swallow you whole. You're still holding that oversized ladle the steward handed you, and people glance at you like they're trying to guess whether you're a cook, a visitor, or someone who's just very emotionally attached to long wooden spoons. You follow the steward toward a cluster of yurts arranged in a wide ring, an area that smells unmistakably like food, horses, and long-distance empire management. Everywhere you look, animals move with purpose. Herds of goats shuffle past you like tiny, determined clouds, sheep cluster together as if planning an escape, and horses, Mongol horses, stand tethered in neat lines, their thick manes blowing in the steppe wind. These horses are compact, muscular, and clearly judging you for being taller but far less useful. The steward gestures around at the herds with a tone of casual pride. "This," he says, "is our food system." You blink, half expecting him to point to some hidden pantry instead. But no, this is it. The Mongols didn't rely on farms or stationary granaries. They relied on motion. The herds, the people, the entire camp constantly shifting like a living organism. It's like the world's largest mobile buffet, except everything has legs and occasionally tries to bite you. A factual tidbit slips seamlessly into your mind as you walk. The Mongols depended heavily on livestock, sheep, goats, horses, camels, and even yaks when terrain demanded it. Their entire diet, economy, and military supply chain moved with these animals. And as the steward explains, that's why the empire could expand so fast. They didn't need to stop and wait for crops. They just followed the grass. You skirt around a small group of women smoking strips of meat over a low fire. Their cauldron bubbles gently, and one of them is stirring it with a spoon big enough to double as a door beam. The aroma hits you salty, earthy, smoky, and your stomach growls loud enough that a nearby goat looks offended. The steward chuckles under his breath and nudges you onward. A quirky detail catches your attention as you pass another yurt. Several children are playing a game involving knucklebone pieces. They toss them into the air, call out predictions, then cheer or groan, depending on how the bones land. The bones clack together with a rhythmic sound. It's oddly soothing. And you make a mental note that someone could definitely market this as a modern fidget toy. Historians still argue whether the game was invented for fortune-telling, entertainment, or training kids to keep steady hands. But watching them, you suspect the answer is simply yes. You step around a pile of horse tackle and pause to watch a man expertly milking a mare. The process is gentle and rhythmic, almost meditative, despite the mare occasionally flicking her ears with a "don't get in my way" energy. The man collects the milk in the leather bucket, then pours it into a large skin bag that's suspended from a wooden tripod. Two young assistants grab the bag and start shaking it as though it insulted their family. The steward explains, with a straight face, that they're making airag, the beloved fermented mare's milk that fuels approximately 60% of Mongol enthusiasm. You take an involuntary step back when one of the assistants offers you a taste. The liquid fizzes softly in the container, and you politely pretend not to notice. The steward whispers, "It's an acquired taste." You whisper back that you have acquired no such taste yet. You keep moving deeper into the heart of the encampment. More yurts circle around you, some plain, others decorated with geometric patterns that tell stories you can't quite decipher. A few have felt coverings dyed in surprising colors, warm ochres, soft reds, even a blue that seems to echo the sky itself. Each yurt represents a family, a unit, a world within a world. The steward explains that some families have lived this way for generations, and you feel a strange swell of admiration for the simplicity and strength of it. Then, something unexpected happens. A man walks past you leading a camel, and you swear the camel gives you a look of deep disapproval. Its expression is unmistakably, "You are not qualified to feed the great Khan." You glance at the steward for confirmation, and he just shrugs. Some camels judge, he says. It's normal. You approach a broad clearing where several large wagons sit in neat rows. Oxen stand calmly nearby, swishing their tails. These are the Empire's mobile pantries. Massive wooden carts, loaded with sacks of dried meat, bundles of onions, clay jars of butter, stacks of millet, and mysterious wrapped parcels that you decide not to investigate too closely. The wagons creak softly in the wind, like old bones trying to whisper secrets. The steward points proudly to one wagon. This one, he says, came all the way from the forests near Baikal. He taps a large barrel strapped to the side. Fish, preserved for months. Good for travel, good for feasts. You nod, impressed and slightly intimidated by the idea of long-distance fish crossing half of Eurasia just to join a dinner party. You crack a quiet joke about medieval supply chains needing GPS, and the steward laughs harder than expected. We have something better than GPS, he says. We have scouts and horses. And horses do not run out of batteries. Fair point. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had the most efficient army logistics of the medieval world. But looking at these wagons, these herds, these endless circles of yurts, you start to believe they really did live inside a perfectly choreographed, self-sustaining machine. Finally, you reach the center of the clearing, where several cooks, clearly veterans of countless imperial feasts, stand over a massive cauldron. The pot is so large it could comfortably hide an entire adult human, though you try not to think about that too hard. One cook glances at you, raises an eyebrow, and nods in approval. Good, he says. We needed another pair of hands. You gently hold up your ladle like a peace offering. The cook grins. Yes, that will do. The steward pats your shoulder. Before the day ends, he says, you'll understand how to feed the great Khan. You're not entirely convinced, but you nod anyway, as the cauldron bubbles in front of you, sending up warm waves of steam that carry the scent of a dinner far bigger than anything you've ever been responsible for. And so you take a breath, tighten your grip on the ladle, and prepare yourself for whatever comes next in this swirling, smoky, horse-filled world. You barely have time to settle into your newfound role as ladle-bearer of destiny before the steward nudges you toward another cluster of activity, the morning dairy tasks. The sun has climbed slightly, higher now, casting long ribbons of light across the camp. Soft neighs echo between the yurts, and somewhere nearby, someone is whistling a tune that sounds half like a lullaby and half like a threat to misbehaving livestock. You follow the steward toward a row of mares tied to a long rope staked firmly into the ground. Each mare stands calmly, thick winter coats glowing in the morning light. A few foals linger nearby, curious and wobbly, as if they've just realized they have knees. You're about to witness one of the most iconic and surprisingly delicate elements of Mongol life. The ritual of milking mares. A woman with steady hands and the patience of a saint gestures for you to step closer. Watch, she says, and you immediately try to look like someone who can learn without tripping over their own feet. She crouches beside a mare, murmuring a few soothing words that sound like soft wind over grass. Then she begins. Her movements are swift, practiced, almost musical. Milk streams into a leather bucket with a quiet, rhythmic whisper. You realize you've been holding your breath. The steward chuckles. Don't worry, he murmurs. She won't kick you unless you deserve it. You're not sure how to feel about that. A factual truth slides in naturally. Mare's milk was central to Mongol diet and culture. Fresh, fermented, churned, stored. Its uses branched out like the spokes of a wheel. Airag, the beloved fermented version, wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of hospitality, strength, and, occasionally, questionable decision-making. Historians still argue whether airag was consumed more for pleasure or necessity, but judging by the enthusiastic churning happening around you, it's definitely not optional. A pair of teenagers are vigorously working a goatskin bag filled with fresh milk. They tug, swing, and knead the bag in a rhythm that makes it look like they're fighting an angry pillow. Every so often, they pause to untangle themselves, then go back at it with renewed determination. You ask the steward how long this process lasts. He shrugs. Until it's airag, he says, unhelpfully. Then comes a quirky detail that no documentary ever prepared you for. A small bunch of herbs hangs from each churning bag. The steward explains they're believed to keep mischievous spirits away so the milk ferments correctly. Historians still debate whether this was widespread belief or just a few families' superstition. But considering you're in the middle of a camp that trusts horses more than calendars, it's easy to imagine the spirits being picky critics of dairy. A woman hands you a ladle full of fresh, warm mare's milk. You stare into it like it's contemplating your fate. She smiles encouragingly, too encouragingly. You take the tiniest sip imaginable. The flavor is sweet, grassy, slightly tart, and aggressively foreign to your modern tongue. You make a face you hope looks politely appreciative, but the woman's grin widens like she just watched you pass a test. Good, she says. It will make you strong. You're not convinced, but you nod vigorously. The camp's morning routine unfolds around you like a living tapestry. Women brush down horses, braid ropes, mend clothing, and weave new saddle pads. Children gather firewood or chase dogs who definitely don't want to be chased. A group of warriors practice archery nearby, loosing arrows so fast you barely hear the twang between shots. Each time an arrow hits its target, the sound echoes a sharp, reassuring thud that merges with the churning of milk and the low hum of camp life. You drift toward a large yurt where the steward says you'll find the morning's second major task, preparing the base broth for tonight's feast. You duck inside, and the warmth hits you immediately. It's like stepping into a cozy sauna run by people who prefer boiling things to breathing. A massive cauldron sits at the center, suspended, over a steady fire, fueled by dried cow dung, another real Mongol trick that modern campers should probably appreciate more. Several cooks stir the pot with wooden paddles, their faces glowing in the firelight. A rich aroma thickens the air: bone broth, onions, salt, maybe a handful of herbs if someone was feeling fancy during the last supply raid. One of the cooks looks up at you with a mischievous grin. You look like someone who can stir, he says. You hand him your ladle defensively, but he waves it away. No paddle. He hands you something the size of an oar. You grip it with both hands, step up to the pot, and start stirring. Stirring a cauldron this big isn't stirring, it's rowing. Your arms protest immediately. The cook laughs softly. Good, he says. If your arms get tired, the broth will taste your weakness. You're 80% sure he's joking. As you stir, the steward shares a surprising fact. The Mongols prized simple foods, but they also had a raider, deep understanding of nutrition. Bone broth for strength, airag for energy, dried meat for endurance. It's not glamorous, but it works so well that Mongol warriors could ride for days with minimal supplies. Historians still argue whether diet played a role in their expansion or whether sheer discipline and horses were enough. But standing here, paddling a cauldron big enough to feed a small village, you suspect the food absolutely mattered. A joke passes among the cooks about last year's feast, when someone accidentally oversalted the broth, and the warriors tried to pretend everything was fine until everyone's lips dried out like old parchment. You chuckle nervously, realizing that one slip, too much salt, too little stirring, too much staring into the middle distance, could earn you a permanent place in Mongol kitchen gossip. A pot nearby starts to bubble too aggressively, and one cook smacks it with a ladle as if disciplining a misbehaving pet. Not yet, he scolds. The pot immediately calms down. You blink. The steward shrugs. Sometimes the pots listen, he whispers. You decide not to question this. As the morning rolls into midday, you step out of the yurt for a breath of fresh air. The wind carries the scent of grass, milk, smoke, and a world that moves at its own timeless rhythm. Somewhere far off, someone plays a two-stringed instrument, the melody drifting lazily across the camp. You take a long breath, feeling yourself settle into the unusual calm of this strange new role. Feeding the Khan still feels like an impossible task hovering somewhere in your future. But for now, you're learning, listening, and slowly, steadily becoming part of the great machine that keeps this empire alive. And with the sun warming your face, the scent of broth lingering on your clothes, and the distant sound of churning milk echoing like a sleepy heartbeat, you step deeper into the day. You wander back toward the line of wagons you saw earlier, the giant wooden beasts creaking softly as if they're sighing under the weight of their own importance. The steward gestures for you to follow him between two particularly large ones, each stacked so high with supplies that they look like medieval skyscrapers on wheels. Welcome, he says with a sweeping arm, to our mobile pantry. You blink, taking in the scene. Wagons filled with dried meat bundled into tight rolls, sacks of millet stacked like soft bricks, clay jars sealed with wax, hunks of cheese hard enough to qualify as blunt weapons, and bundles of herbs tied in string. Everything is meticulously arranged, as if the quartermasters behind this operation were secretly born with spreadsheet souls centuries before spreadsheets existed. You step closer to one wagon, its wooden boards worn smooth from countless journeys across continents. The steward taps a large basket packed with what look like pale, tightly coiled spirals. Dried noodles from the east, he explains. Light to carry. Quick to cook. You raise an eyebrow. Mongols and noodles? You didn't expect that. He shrugs. We borrow what works. Even our pantry is a conqueror. A factual tidbit snuggles in nicely here. The Mongol Empire absorbed countless foods, spices, and techniques from the lands it ruled. Chinese noodles, Persian spices, Siberian fish, preservation, everything blended into a surprisingly cosmopolitan mobile kitchen long before the term fusion cuisine existed. Historians still argue whether this integration was intentional or just the natural side effect of empire. But looking at these wagons, you suspect the Mongols simply enjoyed good, convenient snacks. You peek into another wagon and freeze. Inside are rows of animal fat molded into tidy blocks, tallow used for frying, preserving, and, occasionally, waterproofing. It smells assertive. The steward nods. Keeps well for months. Good for travel. Also good for scaring off wolves if you drop a block on their heads. You can't tell if he's joking. Then you see something quirkier. A long bamboo tube sealed with resin. The steward picks it up reverently. Tea from far lands, he murmurs. The Khan likes it when he wants to feel calm, which, honestly, is not often. He hands it to you, and you're surprised at its weight. The leaves inside must be packed tighter than your schedule on a Monday morning. Further along, you find jars of something that looks suspiciously like pickled vegetables. You sniff near a lid and recoil instantly. Don't worry, the steward says cheerfully. That's the good smell. You blink. The good smell? He nods. If it smells worse, it means something went wrong. You try to imagine what worse could possibly entail and choose not to pursue that thought before bedtime. A group of quartermasters sit nearby, arguing vigorously over inventory. One of them waves. A tally stick, yes. An actual piece of wood carved with notches, while another swears he counted 27 sacks of dried curds, not 26. The debate grows heated, to the point where one man mutters something about being cursed with butter thieves. Historians still argue whether Mongol record-keeping was rudimentary or surprisingly sophisticated, but watching these men fight over dairy numbers like it's a matter of national security, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle. You're led toward a smaller wagon that, at first glance, looks unremarkable. Then the steward pulls back a felt cover, and you inhale sharply. Inside are bundles of spices, saffron threads from Persia, dried ginger, fennel seeds, turmeric, cloves, even a tiny pouch of something the steward refuses to name. Too strong, he whispers, as if afraid the spice itself might hear him and cause drama. The scent from this wagon is intoxicating, warm, floral, earthy, sharp. It's the smell of half the Silk Road condensed into a single wooden box. The steward explains that these spices are not everyday fare. They're for important guests, special feasts, or bribing certain nobles who refuse to be bribed by money alone. You can't decide whether that's endearing or mildly concerning. Then he lifts a bundle wrapped in red silk. You hold your breath instinctively. The steward unwraps it to reveal a dried fish so flat and shiny it looks like someone ironed it. From the northern lakes, he says proudly. You nod, though you're not sure how far enthusiasm for flattened fish can go. Nearby, a young boy scrambles into a wagon and emerges with a strange, brick-like lump, proudly explaining that it's dried cheese older than he is. Still good, he says with a grin. Hard as stone but full of strength. He offers it to you. You tap it experimentally. It makes a sound somewhere between thunk and ouch. You politely decline. You spot a huge bag, filled with tiny round pellets. What's that? You ask. The steward lifts a handful. Dried curd, he says. Warriors keep it in pouches, gives strength. Makes your mouth dry for an hour, but you get used to it. You imagine trying to chew rocks during a long ride and decide you may never achieve true warrior enlightenment. Another quirky detail reveals itself when you notice small pouches tied with vibrant red strings. The steward explains these contain medicinal herbs, some for bruises, others for stomach aches, and one bag designed specifically for people who drink too much airag and regret their choices. He says this with the weary tone of a man who has seen such regret many times. A gust of wind blows across the camp, carrying the scent of dust, wool, and simmering broth from the big cooking yurt. The wagons creak softly in response, like ancient storytellers shifting in their sleep. You run your fingertips along one wagon's wooden frame, feeling the grooves carved into it from decades of travel. These wagons have crossed mountains, deserts, forests, rolling archives of culinary survival. You can't help but imagine them as the unsung heroes of Mongol conquest. Sure, horse archers won the battles, but without these rolling pantries, the army would have run out of energy halfway to breakfast. Historians still argue whether the Mongols were logistical geniuses or simply lucky with geography. But standing here, between wagons stuffed with enough calories to power an empire, you suspect genius played a bigger role than people give them credit for. The steward turns to you with a small smile. "Tonight," he says, "all of this will help feed the Khan, but only if we prepare it right. Only if you help prepare it right." You tighten your grip on your ladle, your silly, heroic, slightly inconvenient ladle, and breathe in the mingling scents of meat, spice, and smoke. The day is warming. The camp hums around you. The wagons stand, ready. And now, so are you. You follow the steward toward the inner ring of the camp, where a wide clearing opens like a calm lake in the middle of a bustling storm. Here, the activity slows down not because people stop working, but because everything is sharper, quieter, more intentional. This is where the dishes for the great Khan himself are planned, and you can feel the energy shift the way you feel temperature drop before a storm. A long wooden table sits under an awning, made of felt and tied down camel hair. On it rests a collection of bowls, knives, ladles, jars, spice bundles, dried herbs, and strangely 3 tiny carved figurines of horses in different poses. You raise an eyebrow, but the steward gives you a look that clearly says, "Don't ask." "This," he says, guiding your gaze across the setup, "is where we plan the Khan's daily menu." You nod solemnly, as though you were expected to understand the gravity of this wooden countertop and its intimidating tableware. You absolutely do not understand the gravity of any of this. The steward points to a row of dishes laid out as examples. "On an ordinary day," he says, "the Khan will expect broth made from bones, fresh meat if available, dried meat if not, noodles sometimes, millet porridge other times, tea, always tea, and, of course, air rag." You feel a small shiver run down your spine. "Of course." He shows you a clay bowl filled with something soft and pale. "And curds," he adds. The Khan likes them at the end of the meal, cleans the palate. He says this with the solemnity of someone describing ancient wisdom passed down through millennia, though you suspect the real reason is simply that dried curd tastes like edible chalk, and nothing lingers after chalk. You're handed a literal list carved on a smooth plank of wood, with markings more cryptic than your last tax form. The steward taps the top line. "This is today's plan. Fresh mutton stew, bone broth, noodles from the caravan, herb tea, fried liver slices, dried curds, and a small sweet made from honey and fermented wheat." You blink. "The Khan eats dessert?" The steward nods. "Not always, but tonight is a celebration." Then, after a pause, "And the Khan has a sweet tooth, but don't tell him I said that." A factual note floats into the moment. While Mongol cuisine was simple, it could be surprisingly varied, especially for nobles. Contrary to the stereotype of endless meat, they consumed dairy, grains, sweets, imported goods, and even delicacies from conquered territories. Historians still argue whether Mongol elites indulged more often in luxury foods or preferred to maintain the rugged diet of their upbringing, but based on tonight's menu, the Khan sees no reason not to enjoy both. The steward gestures toward a stack of bones, rib bones, marrow bones, and at least one ominously large femur. "These," he says, "go into the broth." He picks one up, sniffs. It nods thoughtfully, and sets it down as though choosing the right one is part science, part sorcery. You take a tentative sniff of another bone. It smells like bone. You nod anyway to fit in. Nearby, cooks are slicing onions with alarming speed. One of them pauses, eyes you, and smirks. "First time?" he asks. You nod. "Don't worry," he says kindly. "Just remember, don't cry over onions. They can smell weakness." You smile politely and decide that if there were ever a day for onions to win, it wouldn't be today. On another table, A woman is chopping meat with a cleaver so heavy it could double as a small siege weapon. She works with smooth, repetitive rhythm. She pauses to sprinkle dried herbs across the meat: sage, wild garlic, maybe thyme, though you try not to sniff too loudly for fear of distracting her. She gives you a grin that says she knows exactly how nervous you are and enjoys it. A quirky sight catches your eye. A young assistant carrying a large clay pot that rattles oddly. The steward explains, "Noodles." You lean in. "Noodles." "Rattling?" He shrugs. "We dry them hard so they don't break in travel." The assistant trips slightly, and you hear the noodles clack around like wooden toys. You're amazed they don't turn to dust. You ask whether the Khan ever complains about food. The steward pauses. "Not exactly," he says carefully, "but if a dish is wrong, he may raise an eyebrow." You wait for more. He offers nothing. You ask what happens after the eyebrow. He shrugs. "No one knows, because we don't let the eyebrow happen." You swallow. One of the cooks holds up a small wooden cup. "Taste this," he says. The liquid looks harmless enough, pale, warm, slightly oily. You sip. It hits your tongue like a hug made of fat. Not unpleasant, just assertive. The cook beams. "Broth made from yesterday's bones. Warm, isn't it?" Your polite nod is enough to earn you a refill that you pretend to enjoy. The steward takes you through plating expectations, though plating is a generous word. Most dishes are served in large communal bowls. Some guests dip their fingers directly in the broth. Others use ladles or wooden spoons. The Khan himself receives smaller bowls, each portion perfectly selected. Not too big, the steward insists. Not too small. He likes balance. You also learn that presentation matters in subtle ways. Meat should be cut evenly. Broth should not have stray foam floating on top. Bread should be served warm if possible, or at least not rock solid unless you want people to start sharpening it. Then comes a detail that makes you blink. Every feast includes a bowl of bone shards to be disposed of respectfully. "We never leave bone scraps lying around," the steward says. "Bad fortune, and dogs fight over them." Historians still argue whether this custom was spiritual, practical, or simply about preventing canine drama. The final part of the morning's lesson comes with a quiet warning. "There is one dish," the steward says gravely, "that must never be missing." You lean in. He holds up a pouch of herbs and a small jar of butter. "Tea," he says. The Khan expects tea at every meal. Strong, hot, creamy. You nod, trying not to laugh at the idea of the fierce ruler of the world sipping buttery tea like someone settling into a cozy winter evening. You look around the clearing again, the spices, the bones, the noodles, the quiet hum of coordinated movement. It's a symphony of preparation, each step part of something larger, something ancient, something essential. Feeding the Khan is not just a job, it's choreography. The steward pats your shoulder. "You're learning," he says. "Slowly, but learning." You exhale, feeling the warmth of the clearing, the scent of broth and herbs drifting through the air, and the distant sound of horses stamping patiently. The day is still young. Tonight's feast is coming. And somehow, impossibly, you're part of the menu's creation now. You barely have time to recover from the revelation that sweet-toothed Khan dessert is a thing. Before the steward taps your arm and points toward a group of riders preparing their horses. Saddles are tightened. Quivers are checked. Birds, yes. Actual enormous birds are perched calmly on leather gloves, blinking with regal disinterest. The steward grins. "Time to gather the fresh meat for tonight," he says. "You're joining the hunt." You blink. "You mean meat? Meat?" He nods. "Unless you want to serve the Khan, a stew made of optimism. That seems unlikely to go over well, and so you find yourself walking toward the hunting party, where horses stamp impatiently, falcons twitch their feathers, and warriors look like they've all rehearsed the same "I take my job very seriously" expression. One warrior tosses you a small pouch. "Salt," he says, "for bleeding the meat." You nod, as if this were part of your normal morning routine. A factual tidbit nestles in smoothly. Mongols hunted frequently to supplement their herd's meat supply, using falconry, archery, and organized drives, called nurge. Enormous semicircular hunts, where entire units herded game animals inward until the hunters could take clean shots. These hunts served both practical and military training purposes, Historians still argue whether the Great Khan joined them regularly or simply oversaw them. But judging by the energy in this camp, hunting feels like a national pastime played at terrifying scale. As you approach the horses, you notice how different Mongol saddles look high-backed, wooden, sturdy. They're built for endurance, not comfort. The steward helps you mount one, though helps might be generous. It's more like he shoves you upward and hopes physics will take the wheel. You settle awkwardly onto the saddle. The horse snorts. You swear it's laughing. The hunting party rides out in a loose formation, and you cling to the reins with both hands, hoping this horse understands you're new here. The wind whips across your face, smelling of sagebrush, dust, and somewhere underneath it all, the cold, metallic hint of steppes that stretch beyond imagination. One hunter rides beside you, a golden eagle perched on his arm. The bird's talons dig into a thick leather glove, and its eyes blaze with predatory focus. The hunter notices your nervous glance. "Don't worry," he says. "She only attacks on command." Then he adds, after a pause, "Usually." You smile weakly. A quirky detail soon appears. One rider carries a small wooden flute, which he blows occasionally, not to call the birds, but to keep himself calm. "My heart beats too fast before a hunt," he explains. The flute reminds it who's in charge. You consider adopting the same strategy, but suspect your heart would ignore you entirely. The group stops at a ridge overlooking a broad valley dotted with shrubs and tufts of tall grass. Below, small herds of gazelle move like wind-painted brushstrokes. The leader raises a hand, and the hunters spread out in a wide semicircle. And then it begins. Falcons launch into the sky, slicing through the air with terrifying elegance. Riders knock arrows, horses surge forward. You are carried along in a blur of hooves and adrenaline. The gazelle scatter. The falcons dive. Warriors shout commands. You grip the saddle with every muscle available, convinced that falling off would not only ruin your day, but also give the horses something to gossip about. A hunter looses an arrow. It whistles through the air and finds its mark cleanly. The gazelle collapses instantly, swift, humane, efficient. You're relieved. You didn't exactly want to witness gore today. PG-13 remains mercifully intact. You dismount, or rather, slide off the horse in a semi-graceful heap. The hunters gather around the fallen gazelle. With practiced motions, they field-dress the animal, working quickly to avoid attracting unwanted predators. They set the meat in leather sacks and sprinkle salt generously. You try to help, but your contribution mostly consists of handing over tools and staying out of the way. A young hunter laughs. "Don't worry," he says kindly. "First hunt is always like this. My first time, I dropped my knife and nearly stabbed my horse." He pauses. "The horse didn't forgive me for months." You appreciate his vulnerability. Once the gazelle is secured, the hunters move toward a cluster of hares startled from a thicket. One warrior dismounts and, with a gentle motion, sets his eagle loose. The bird swoops down in a silent arc and returns seconds later with a hare pinned in its talons. The hunter strokes the eagle's neck proudly. "Good girl," he whispers. The bird blinks like she already knows she's the star of the show. Historians still debate whether Mongol falconry originated locally or came from Chinese influence. But judging by these hunters, the practice feels deeply woven into their spirit. The coordination between human, horse, and bird is mesmerizing, like a tri-species ballet performed with lethal precision. The hunting party continues, gathering several hares, one fox, and an impressive number of birds flushed from tall grass. Each catch is treated with respect, quick, efficient, and purposeful. Nothing is wasted. Every piece of meat will find a place in tonight's feast or in future meals, dried, boiled, or stewed. At one point, an elderly hunter points to the distant horizon. "Years ago," he says softly, "the Great Khan himself rode out here. He caught a stag bigger than any I've ever seen." He pauses, his eyes distant. "He laughed when it fell, said the land itself offered the gift." The man smiles, a grin edged with nostalgia. You can almost picture the scene, Khan on horseback, the steppe wind tugging at his cloak, the world itself seeming to lean toward him. With the day's catch secured, the party regroups. Horses stamp the ground impatiently. Falcons preen themselves arrogantly. The hunters share a joke about a time a falcon stole a nobleman's hat, and the entire group, including the birds, seems to find the story amusing. You begin the ride back, the meat secured in leather bundles tied to saddles. The sun warms your shoulders, and the wind carries a faint whisper from the grasslands, an ancient rhythm of hunt, feast, rest, repeat. As camp comes into view again, smoke rising softly in welcoming spirals, you feel an unexpected sense of accomplishment. True, you didn't fire an arrow, command a falcon, or display any meaningful competence, but you survived. And in Mongol terms, surviving a hunt is already a win. The steward meets you with a relieved smile. Good, he says. You came back. And with meat too. Tonight's stew will be worthy of the Khan. You hand him the salted gazelle with pride mixed with the subtle aroma of fear and saddle sweat. The camp embraces you again with its familiar symphony. Churning milk, bubbling broth, horses snorting, cooks shouting, pots clanging. The day's tasks are far from done, but one major piece of the feast is now secured. And as the camp hums with afternoon energy, you find yourself ready, more ready than before, at least to step into the next layer of this great, rolling world built on herds, hunts, and hunger. You return from the hunt smelling faintly of horse, dust, and whatever emotional residue comes from pretending to know what you're doing. The steward gives you a once-over, nods approvingly, and gestures toward a long row of colourful tents that weren't there earlier. Good timing, he says. The market just arrived. You blink. The market? He grins. Yes. Traders follow the camp. Some join for a day, some for months. Food, tools, silk, spices, everything travels with us. He leans in conspiratorially. Sometimes even strange vegetables that should not bounce the way they do. You decide immediately that you have follow-up questions. As you approach the tents, you're hit with a kaleidoscope of sounds, smells, and movement. The air is filled with shouts in at least 5 languages, none of which you understand, alongside the steady hum of bargaining, laughter, animal bleats, and the occasional clang of a dropped pot. The ground beneath your feet is littered with trampled grass and footprints from humans, horses, camels, and at least one creature whose tracks you really hope belong to a large dog. The market itself looks like someone gathered pieces of the world and stitched them together into a lively quilt. Brightly dyed fabrics flutter in the breeze. Stacks of bowls gleam in the sun. Fresh herbs are tied in bundles. A man roasts something skewered over a fire, and the aroma makes your stomach growl loud enough for someone nearby to chuckle. You pause at a stand where a Chinese merchant arranges coils of hand-pulled noodles with the seriousness of an artist preparing an exhibition. He sees you staring, grins widely, and offers you a dried noodle to hold. It's surprisingly sturdy. Lasts months, he says proudly. Boil for 2 minutes. Good as fresh. You nod appreciatively. The steward whispers, "Don't drop it. It breaks the heart of the noodle man." Next to him, a Persian trader displays jars of saffron, turmeric, dates, and pistachios. He waves you closer. "Taste?" he asks, offering a pistachio. You accept it, crunch, and instantly understand why people cross deserts for these. "The Khan likes these," the merchant says. "Sends people to find me every time we meet." You imagine the Khan snacking between conquering continents and decide that tracks. A factual tidbit glides in naturally. Although the Mongols were mobile and deeply rooted in pastoral life, they thrived on long-distance exchange. The Silk Road expanded massively under their rule, turning markets like this into melting pots of food, ideas, and questionable economic decisions. Historians still argue whether the Mongols intentionally fostered this commerce or simply benefited from controlling vast trade corridors, but either way, the results were undeniable. You drift toward a tent with baskets of produce, some familiar, some defiantly mysterious. Round root vegetables, crisp leaves, bright red berries that look delicious but might also kill you instantly. You point at a strange oblong vegetable and ask the steward, "Is that edible?" He shrugs. "Depends which end you eat." You put it down slowly. In another corner, a group of traders from Central Asia display enormous wheels of cheese, some soft, some so hard you question whether they're actually food. One merchant knocks on a cheese wheel proudly, producing a sound somewhere between thunk and dungeon wall. "Very durable," he says. "Good for travel." You politely resist imagining it as a potential weapon. Then comes the moment the steward hinted at earlier, the bouncing vegetable. You reach a stand where a man holds up what looks like a round, greenish gourd. He drops it on the ground. It bounces. Actually bounces. You blink. The steward casually explains, "It's dried. very light, good for storage. You immediately wonder who first discovered the bounce and how loud their scream was. A quirky detail emerges when you watch two traders arguing passionately over a bundle of onions. You don't speak their language, but the universal gestures of, "These onions are clearly superior," and "No, yours are an insult to my ancestors," come through perfectly. Eventually, one throws a handful of dried apricots into the deal, and peace is restored. You pass a stand where cups of hot tea are being poured into wooden bowls. The steam curls gracefully, carrying notes of herbs and something buttery. A woman hands you a bowl. "Drink," she says. "Good for the throat after shouting prices all morning." The tea is warm, soothing, and unmistakably rich with dairy. You take a long sip and feel a calm settle into your shoulders. Nearby, a group of children who seem to have more freedom than any modern toddler could dream of race through the market, with small wooden toys carved to resemble horses. One child waves at you with a delighted grin, then immediately trips over a bundle of fabric and pops back up, unfazed. You envy their resilience. The steward points out a section of stalls specializing in cookware: cauldrons, pans, knives, ladles, thankfully smaller than yours, strainers made of woven horsehair, and wooden spoons with intricate carvings. One elderly craftsman beckons you over and places a beautifully carved spoon into your hand. "For good stirring," he says. "Keeps the spirits happy." You're starting to notice that in Mongol culture, everything is designed to keep spirits happy except, perhaps, the spirits themselves. Historians still debate whether these market gatherings were planned or spontaneous, but standing here, the mix of cultures and goods feels both purposeful and joyous, like a traveling festival disguised as a supply chain. A sudden shout draws your attention. A merchant has spilled a basket of dried plums, which scatter across the ground in every direction. Children dive after them like they're chasing treasure. A nearby horse tries to join in, only to be redirected by its rider. You watch the chaos unfold with mild amusement. The steward sighs. Markets are always the same: people, noise, and something rolling away. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the bustling tents. The air fills with the smell of roasting meat, sweet fruit, and spices warming over fires. You feel yourself drawn deeper into the rhythm of it all. You buy nothing, you have no currency, and no idea how commerce works here, but you gain something better, an understanding of how this empire keeps itself fed, clothed, and flavored. The steward places a hand on your arm. "Now," he says, "we gather what we need for the feast." He purchases herbs from the Persian trader, noodles from the Chinese merchant, onions from the still bickering duo, and a small jar of something suspiciously labeled, "Very good spice, definitely not too strong." You hold the bundle carefully, praying the jar doesn't earn its name in the worst way. As you leave the market, the noise fades behind you like a slowly closing curtain. The sun warms your face, the camp awaits your return, the feast is drawing nearer, and with your arms full of ingredients from across half the world, you begin to understand. Feeding the Khan isn't just a task, it's participation in an empire-wide collaboration, a marketplace of nations, a symphony of flavors, and somehow, improbably, you're now part of the orchestra. You return from the market carrying an armful of ingredients that absolutely should not be trusted with someone who once burned instant noodles. But everyone in the camp seems strangely confident that you'll manage just fine. The steward guides you toward the heart of the cooking area, a cluster of yurts, fire pits, iron cauldrons, and people who stir things with the seriousness of monks performing sacred rites. "You're cooking for conquerors now," the steward says with a grin, "which means everything must taste bold, simple, and entirely resistant to complaints." You swallow. "Is complaining common?" He shakes his head. "No, but when it happens, it is memorable." You decide immediately that your life goal is to avoid creating memorable complaints. A large cauldron so wide you could comfortably sit inside it if you made a series of poor life decisions bubbles over a steady fire. Next to it, two cooks chop onions and meat with frightening efficiency. One of them glances up, sees your bundle of ingredients, and beckons you closer. "Good," she says. "You bring the world to our pot." You place your ingredients down carefully, as if they're small animals that might bite. The cooks begin sorting them, the noodles to one side, the herbs to another, the very questionable spice jar placed as far from you as possible. A factual note settles in naturally here. Mongol cooking wasn't especially elaborate, but it was adaptable. Meat, usually mutton, or the horse, was the backbone of every major dish. Dairy products, enriched broths, noodles and grains were added when available. Cooking techniques ranged from boiling and steaming to roasting and fermenting. The most iconic method? The enormous cauldron stew, where almost anything edible could be thrown in and transformed into a hearty, sustaining meal. Historians still argue whether the Mongols preferred variety or sameness, but based on tonight's kettle, variety seems to be winning. One cook hands you a knife that could double as a diplomatic tool, depending on how the day goes. Cut, she says. Even pieces. Broth tastes stories through shape. You pause. It tastes stories? She nods with absolute certainty. If pieces are too big, the broth thinks you are lazy. You glance at the steward for clarification. He shrugs. It's poetic, he says. Just cut evenly. You begin slicing vegetables with the focus of someone diffusing a turnip bomb. The onion fumes sting your eyes instantly, but you force yourself to stay strong. You remember what earlier cooks told you. Mongol onions can smell weakness. You will not be defeated by produce today. A quirky detail blooms the moment you hear someone humming nearby, not just humming, but humming at a pot. A cook gently circles the cauldron, humming deep throat-singing tones that vibrate the air around you. You ask the steward if this is spiritual. He whispers, no. He just swears the stew boils faster if he sings to it. Historians still argue whether Mongol throat singing evolved partly from cooking camp acoustics, but right now, you're too deep in vegetable duty to investigate that claim. As you chop, a woman next to you drops entire bones, marrow-filled, knobby, aromatic, into the pot with a satisfying splash. The broth shifts into a richer color immediately. She adds salt, dried herbs, and a handful of something crumbly that smells both delicious and slightly dangerous. Curd, she says, makes the broth hearty. You nod, as if this makes perfect sense, even though curd in stew sounds like accidental cooking. Then comes the moment you've been waiting for. The legendary, throw everything in and let the pot sort it out method. Cooks begin adding ingredients one after another. Chunks of mutton, slices of liver, onions, dried curds softened in hot water, handfuls of noodles, herbs from Persia, roots from Central Asia, and, at one point, what looks suspiciously like a carrot, but with the confidence of a vegetable that refuses to be called a carrot. Everything goes in. Nothing is measured. No one writes anything down. And yet, the mixture smells heavenly. That's when a pot nearby explodes. Well, explodes might be dramatic, but the lid flies off with enough force to send 3 cooks ducking, and a wave of steam blasts into the air like a geyser. A small blob of dough hits the ground with a cheerful splat. You jump. What was that? A cook waves dismissively. Dough rose too fast. Happens. Pot gets excited. You stare. The pot was excited? She nods, very passionate about bread. You're not sure whether you should laugh, worry, or offer condolences to the pot. A few steps away, a camel groans loudly and refuses to budge as its handler tries to move a sack of grain past it. The camel sits down, completely blocking the path, then stares triumphantly at everyone like a king on strike. Someone mutters that this camel does this every feast day. He senses the chaos. The handler sighs. He contributes to it. The steward returns with a bucket of fresh water and pours some into the cauldron. Steam rises in soft waves, carrying with it the dreamy scent of meat, herbs, and smoke. You stir the mixture with the giant wooden paddle, and the resistance is so strong you feel like you're rowing through a swamp made of dinner. A cook leans over your shoulder. Stir clockwise, she says gently. Otherwise the broth gets moody. You nod and correct your direction. As you stir, you catch snippets of conversation. Last year, someone forgot the salt. Khan drank 3 bowls before saying a single word. What word? Salt. Everyone shudders. Another cook mentions how one feast featured a dish so spicy that half the warriors began sweating in perfect synchronization. Historians still debate whether spice tolerance was a matter of honor, but based on the cook's expressions, losing control of your sweat glands in front of the Khan was basically social death. As the afternoon deepens, the stew thickens into something glorious, fragrant, hearty, shimmering with fat and promise. The cooks discuss additions. More noodles, a handful of onions, a pinch of that mysterious very good spice. They choose caution. Last time someone overused the very good spice, a warrior hallucinated that his horse was judging him. To be fair, horses do judge people, but preferably without hallucinations. The steward finally nods. Good, he says. The Khan will taste this, and know his cooks respect him. You exhale a long breath you didn't realize you were holding. Cooking for conquerors is chaotic, loud, improvised, superstitious, and unbelievably alive. As the sun drifts toward the horizon, the cauldron simmers with everything gathered today, meat from the hunt, herbs from traders, dairy from the morning rituals, and your very questionable chopping skills. And through the smoke, the heat, the laughter, the scolding of pots and camels alike, you feel something settle gently in your chest. You're part of this now. All you need to do next is survive the serving. The stew simmers with a low, satisfied burble as the afternoon stretches on, and the steward signals that it's time to head toward the outer edge of the camp again. Caravans are arriving, he says. Tribute, trade, gifts, and complications. You follow him, wiping a small constellation of broth droplets from your sleeves. As you walk, the distant sound of jingling harness bells grows louder. Dust rises on the horizon in soft plumes. The air shifts. There's an energy here that feels different from the daily routines of the camp. You're not the only one feeling it. Children stop their games. Warriors straighten. Even the horses prick their ears. You soon see the first caravan emerge from the haze. A line of camels draped in colorful fabrics and jangling ornaments. Behind them come wagons filled with crates. Behind them come men leading mules carrying bundles wrapped tight in silk. They look tired, sun-baked, and profoundly relieved to have reached Mongol territory without being trampled, robbed, or swallowed by the geography itself. The steward shades his eyes. From the east, he murmurs. China. Looks like tribute. You glance at the lead camel, which somehow manages to walk like it owns the entire steppe. When its handler bows to the steward, you quickly realize this isn't just a delivery, it's tribute to the great Khan. Gifts sent not because people want to, but because they must. A factual note folds neatly into the moment. Under Mongol rule, tribute caravans traveled vast distances carrying silk, porcelain, food, spices, livestock, medicines, and even artisans. These offerings weren't merely gifts, they were statements of loyalty, bargaining chips, or reminders of subordination. Historians still argue whether the tribute system was more oppressive or mutually beneficial. But standing here, watching men unload crates with both respect and exhaustion, you sense it was a complicated web of obligation. The first crates open with soft thuds. Inside, bricks of tea stacked neatly like miniature walls. The steward grins. The Khan will be pleased. He drinks tea as if conquering requires hydration. You nod solemnly. Another crate reveals porcelain bowls painted with elegant cranes. A nearby cook eyes them with reverence. We won't use these, she whispers. Too fragile. If we break one... She trails off. You don't need the ending. Behind the Chinese caravan comes another, this one clearly from Persia. The people wear loose, flowing robes, their camels taller and more dramatic looking. When they unload their goods, the air fills with scents that don't belong to this part of the world. Saffron, cinnamon, rosewater, dried limes. A merchant unwraps a parcel containing sugar, a rare luxury, and the steward gasps softly. You turn to him, curious. Sugar? He nods. For the Khan's suite. Perfect timing. Then he adds, with a smirk, try not to spill any. Sugar is worth more than half the camp. You tuck your hands behind your back immediately. More caravans arrive from the west, bringing wool, bronze items, dried fruits, and cheeses so pungent they could probably win a fight. You watch as a man opens a wooden box to reveal an intricately woven carpet. The steward touches it lightly. From Khwarezm, he whispers. Enough to make a noble jealous. Somewhere to your left, a camel decides it no longer wants to participate in gravity. It collapses dramatically onto the ground, legs folded underneath like a sulking child. Its handler groans. He does this every time, the man says. He hates gift exchanges. You make a mental note that camels apparently have strong feelings about diplomacy. Among the incoming goods, you spot something unusual, a small wooden chest sealed with metal fittings. The men carrying it treat it with reverence. When they set it down, the steward raises an eyebrow. Probably spices, he says, or something precious. You lean closer. Fascinated. One of the traders kneels, opens the chest, and reveals nuts, just nuts, lots of nuts. You look at the steward, he looks at the nuts. The steward shrugs. Well, precious to someone. A quirky detail emerges as a group of young men unload tall, bundles of reeds tied in tight sheaves. You ask what they're for. One man laughs. Mats, baskets, maybe musical instruments. Or maybe someone just owed us reeds. Tribute is unpredictable. Nearby, a group of cooks has gathered around a Persian trader demonstrating how to use dried limes in stew. He breaks one open, and the sharp, citrusy scent makes your eyebrows rise. Adds depth, the trader explains, and impresses nobles. The cooks exchange glances that say, the Khan will be impressed. One thing becomes very clear as you watch all this. Tonight's feast is no ordinary meal. It's a diplomatic balancing act, disguised as dinner. A parade of food diplomacy. Every item arriving will be interpreted, whether correctly or not, as a signal of loyalty, wealth, respect, or cultural exchange. Historians still debate how much food influenced politics in the Mongol court, but seeing this scene unfold, it's obvious that dishes tonight will represent more than nourishment. They'll represent alliances. The steward hands you a small pouch. These are from the Eastern Caravan, he says. Dried mushrooms, very valuable. You'll add them to the stew later. You nod and carefully open the pouch to peek inside. The mushrooms are wrinkled, dark, and slightly glossy like someone dehydrated tiny leather hats. You sniff them. The aroma is deep and earthy. The steward snatches the pouch gently. Careful, he says. If you drop these, the cooks will make you eat plain broth for a week. You shiver at the thought. As the caravans settle, merchants begin pitching temporary tents for trade. Some light incense. Some feed their animals. One begins playing a stringed instrument, the melody wandering softly through the camp like a curious spirit. The steward walks you through a mental checklist. We now have fresh meat from the hunt, spices from Persia, tea and noodles from China, dried fruits from the West, and herbs from traders in between. Tonight's feast will honor all corners of the empire. You exhale slowly, realizing how enormous this responsibility is. Feeding the Khan means feeding the empire, symbolically and literally. Suddenly, a commotion. Two men shout, one from the Persian caravan, one from the Chinese one. They're arguing over who should present their tribute first. You watch as they gesture wildly, one waving a sack of dates like a weapon, the other brandishing a noodle coil like a culinary challenge. A nearby elder sighs. Every feast, he mutters. Always something. The steward steps in, calming them with a simple gesture. The Khan will see both your gifts, he says firmly, and he will eat what he pleases. Both men fall silent. You whisper, does the Khan really choose? The steward smiles faintly. No, but they don't need to know that. As the sun dips toward the horizon, casting the camp in warm gold, you carry the tribute ingredients back toward the cooking area. The air fills with the scent of simmering stew, roasting meat, and now, the subtle perfume of spices traveling from far-off lands. You feel the weight of history, not heavy, but immense. Tonight, you won't just serve food, you will serve a world. And somehow, impossibly, you're becoming part of the recipe. The sun settles lower across the steppe, turning the entire camp gold, as if someone applied a warm filter over reality. Fires crackle to life one by one, their smoke drifting upward in thin, dreamy ribbons. You return to the cooking area with the steward, your arms full of tribute ingredients that look far too precious to trust with your historically questionable kitchen skills. But there's no turning back now. Tonight's feast won't build itself. The steward leads you to a long clearing where the logistical side of Mongol feasts unfolds in surprisingly organized chaos. People move with intent, carrying bowls, cauldrons, sacks of grain, bundles of kindling, and more ladles than any civilization should reasonably need. It feels like watching a giant, well-rehearsed dance, except half the dancers are holding sharp knives, and the other half are yelling instructions about meat. This, the steward says proudly, is how you feed thousands. You blink. Thousands? He claps your shoulder. The Khan never dines alone. His generals, his family, visiting nobles, merchants, guards, everyone with rank. And then their assistants. It grows fast. You try to swallow your panic discreetly. Cooks work at different stations, each dedicated to a specific task. One area is for boiling broth. another for roasting meats, another for noodles, another for dairy preparations. A group kneads dough for flatbread, slapping rounds of dough onto heated stones with rhythmic thwacks. A few even brew a kind of light beer, the scent gently sour but oddly comforting. A factual detail slides in. Mongol feasts were vast, structured events. Large gatherings required carefully planned rations, distribution patterns, and timing. While the Mongols didn't use written schedules or modern logistics, they relied on hierarchy, experience, and communal coordination. Every person knew their role. Historians still argue whether the Mongols invented uniquely efficient feast planning or simply refined older nomadic methods, but watching this unfold, you suspect they engineered an art form out of feeding a small army. The steward shows you the rationing layout. Large wooden tubs hold boiled meat. Smaller bowls contain soups, broths, and teas. Each tub is marked with a symbol simple, direct, and unmistakable. A horse head, a crescent moon, a spear, a geometric knot. These aren't decorations, they're instructions. One symbol means for warriors, another means for nobles, another for elders, another for guests from far lands. You point to the horse head symbol. Why that one? Warriors eat a lot, the steward says dryly. We give them high-fat cuts. Keeps them strong and quiet. Across the clearing, a group of young assistants rush back and forth with bowls balanced in their arms. They move quickly but efficiently, like a relay team fueled by fear of dropping dinner in front of people who can fire arrows while galloping at full speed. A quirky scene unfolds as a camel casually wanders into the rationing zone and sniffs at a roasting spit. A cook shouts, waving a ladle like a weapon. The camel looks deeply unimpressed, then slowly moves elsewhere. You're starting to think camels consider themselves above rules, consequences, and basic animal etiquette. The steward pulls you closer to a giant board well, a large slab of wood covered in small knives sticking out like decorative spikes. This, he says, is the serving order. You stare. Serving orders? On knives? He explains that each knife is engraved with a symbol representing a clan, rank, or guest type. The knives are placed in rows that determine who gets served first, second, third, and so on. You whisper, "Isn't that confusing?" He smiles. "Not if you know how to read them. And if you don't," he points to a cook whose hair is standing on end from stress, "you end up like him." You decide you will memorize at least 5 knife symbols before the night is over. Somewhere behind you, a group of soldiers argues about how many bowls should go to a particular unit. One insists they need 30. Another insists 25. A third says it doesn't matter because half the soldiers will steal food from the other half anyway. The steward sighs. Feasts always bring math problems. Historians still argue whether Mongols used tally sticks or verbal counts to distribute feast portions. Here, watching them bicker over numbers with the intensity of mathematicians defending dissertations, you suspect the truth is both and neither method prevented chaos. Nearby, a woman ladles broth into giant pails with an expression of serene authority. You assume she must be a senior cook because even the warriors lower their voices around her. She motions you over. "Stir this," she says, handing you another oversized paddle. You peer into her cauldron. The broth is clearer than the earlier stew, fresh, aromatic, simmering with bones, onions, and just a hint of herbs. She watches you stir, nods approvingly, then adds a handful of dried mushrooms from the tribute pouch. The scent deepens instantly, earthy and rich. "Good," she murmurs. "The Khan will taste the world tonight." You feel oddly honored. At another station, cooks assemble plates with dried curds and nuts, simple palate cleansers that look suspiciously like medieval trail mix. You ask if the Khan eats this too. A cook replies, "Only after heavy meals. Helps the stomach." You decide not to ask follow-up questions about Mongol digestive science. In the roasting zone, long skewers hold cuts of meat cooked over open flames. The fat drips, sizzling, sending tiny sparks of flavor into the evening air. Warriors hover too close, eyeing the meat like wolves denied prey. One reaches forward with suspicious nonchalance. A cook smacks his hand instantly. "You eat later," she warns. The warrior withdraws solemnly, rubbing his knuckles. A quirky detail emerges when you notice a young assistant carefully brushing each roasted cut of meat with melted butter, using a bunch of reeds tied together. You ask why. The assistant beams. Makes meat shiny. Shiny meat impresses guests. This is apparently an unassailable rule. As the sky transitions to deeper orange, the steward brings everything together. The cauldrons, the roasting spits, the bowls, the knives, the ration symbols, the tribute goods, the daily staples, and all the invisible rules binding them. We do not just serve food, he says. We present order, respect, hospitality, power. You nod slowly, because this vast, choreographed, barely controlled storm of steam, fire, shouting, laughter, and tradition isn't just a feast. It's the empire, rendered edible. When everything is finally arranged for serving, the steward steps back, hands on hips, surveying the organized layout like a general before battle. He hands you a small wooden bowl. For the Khan's first taste, he says. Your stomach flips. You are, unbelievably, part of this. Night approaches. The feast awaits, and soon you'll carry food into the great Khan's presence. No pressure. Twilight settles over the steppe like a soft blanket, the sky fading from gold to dusky lavender. Fires glow brighter, shadows stretch longer. The murmurs of the camp soften into a steady, rhythmic hum, the kind that hints a monumental moment is approaching. You follow the steward toward the beverage station, which, judging by the number of people gathered there, is just as important as the food. Tea first, he says. Always tea. You nod, gripping your wooden bowl with the gravity of someone holding an ancient relic rather than a surprisingly warm drinking vessel. The tea tents are arranged in a neat semicircle, their fires glowing beneath hanging kettles. Servants bustle about preparing different liquids: tea, bone broth, fermented drinks, and something that smells like butter, having an existential crisis. You step closer and immediately catch the scent of Mongol tea, creamy, salty, rich. It's not what you expect tea to smell like, or look like, or act like. But the cooks take it very seriously. A burly woman with arms like tree trunks ladles tea from a kettle and offers you a taste. Try, she commands, her tone suggesting that declining isn't an option. You sip. It's hot, very hot, and fatty, and strangely comforting, like someone liquefied a warm blanket and added a pinch of something you can't identify. She watches your reaction closely. Good? You nod so aggressively she laughs. You learn. Tea is how we show respect. A factual detail arrives neatly. Mongols drank tea not simply for flavor but for nourishment. Made with tea leaves, salt, fat, and sometimes grains, it energized riders who needed calories on long journeys. Historians still argue whether tea entered Mongol life from Tibetan influence or Chinese trade, but everyone agrees it became deeply embedded in their ritual of hospitality. You wander to another table where younger assistants handle broth service. Large wooden ladles dip rhythmically into steaming pots. A man with a braided beard gestures at you. Hold this, he says, giving you a bowl heaped with bone fragments swimming in liquid. You blink. This is for the elders, he explains. They believe broth carries wisdom. The bones whisper to them. He leans in. I've never heard a bone whisper, but I don't tell them that. You gaze into the bowl suspiciously, half expecting the bones to strike up conversation. On the far side of the tent, a debate breaks out between two cooks holding of all things a tiny shard of bone. You catch fragments. It must be placed correctly. You're too superstitious. You're too careless. What's the worst that could happen? The Khan ignores one bone? Both men gasp, dramatically, as if someone said the sky wasn't blue. A third cook intervenes, snatching the bone and tossing it into a disposal bowl. There, she says. No arguments. Served cleanly. No omens. You raise an eyebrow, and she explains. Bone etiquette matters. Someone once placed a bone upright in a bowl. Very rude. The Khan's uncle didn't speak to anyone for a week. Historians still argue whether Mongol bone etiquette came from practicality, spirituality, or simple aesthetics. But in this kitchen, bones are taken as seriously as international treaties. A quirky detail materializes as you walk by another tent. A small boy is blowing across the surface of a tea bowl with such intense concentration that his cheeks puff out like bellows. A cook walks by and pats his head. Training, she explains. One day he will serve nobles. Must learn to cool tea exactly 2 breaths. You nod respectfully. 2-breath tea cooling is clearly a high art. The steward waves you. Over. Hold this, he says, handing you a stack of small wooden cups. These are for the Khan's table. They must be spotless. You examine them. They sparkle in the firelight, polished smooth, carved with swirling patterns, each unique. He inspects your grip. Carry with both hands, he says. Drop even one, and the cup carvers will chase you. You have no doubt they would. Nearby, a pot of something bubbling catches your attention. Steam rises in fragrant wisps. You peer inside and see a mixture of herbs, mint, wild thyme, some unfamiliar leaves floating gently. The woman stirring it smiles. Sleep tea, she says, for after the feast, calms the belly. You ask how it compares to the Khan's preferred tea. She shrugs. He does not sleep tea. He only tea. You appreciate the clarity. You step aside as a line of servers marches through carrying trays of liquids, tea, broth, and other small ceremonial drinks. The precision impresses you. Not a single drop spills. Their movements are steady, tight, almost dance-like. The steward explains. Serving the Khan starts with liquids. Hot drinks open the feast. They show readiness, respect, hospitality. You whisper, "What if the drink is too hot?" He smiles grimly. We do not let that happen. Then comes a moment that really shouldn't be as funny as it is. Someone spills tea on a camel. The camel, deeply offended, stands up abruptly, sending one poor assistant stumbling backward into a sack of onions. Onions scatter everywhere, rolling across the ground like panicked marbles. Another assistant shrieks because he steps on one and believes, briefly, that he has stepped on a snake. Chaos blossoms instantly. You stand frozen, holding your cups tightly. The steward sighs. Every feast. Always something. As people scramble to gather runaway onions and soothe the camel's wounded pride, you're ushered toward an area where final drink presentation is being assembled. Bowls are lined up in precise order, one for the Khan, one for his family, one for his generals, and so on. Your task is simple and terrifying. Ensure the correct bowl is placed on the correct tray. The steward watches you like a hawk. This bowl, he says, tapping a thick-lipped one. Khan's tea. Notice the carving. You study it. A spiral pattern. Slightly deeper grooves. Traditional. Serious. No nonsense. You memorize it as though your life depends on it, which in fairness it might. He continues, this bowl, tapping another, is for the nobles. Slightly wider. Less deep. You nod. Another bowl, carved with a tiny horse silhouette, is for honored guests. Another with floral motifs for the women of the royal household. This one, he says last, is for the storytellers. It's plain but charming, with a small chip on the rim. They say the chip keeps them humble. You glance at him. Does it? He shrugs. Not really. They still brag about everything. A final factual detail slips in. Mongol feasts place significant emphasis on drinking rituals. Order mattered. Cups mattered. Who received what and when communicated. Rank, respect, and political nuance. Historians still argue whether rituals were stricter during the period of Genghis Khan or his successors, but here, in this camp, precision feels ancient and sacred. Once all bowls are prepared, the steward hands you the Khan's tea. Your hands shake slightly. Do not spill, he says gently. Walk steady, and remember no sudden movements. The guards hate sudden movements. Reassuring. He guides you toward the grand yurt in the distance, its silhouette glowing under torchlight. Fires flicker. Shadows dance. The camp softens into quiet anticipation. You are ready, the steward says. You absolutely are not ready. But you walk forward anyway, cradling the bowl as if it contains the empire itself. The feast awaits. You walk carefully back toward the main, cooking area, relieved that the steward has taken the Khan's tea from your trembling hands and passed it to someone far steadier. Your usefulness, it seems, is better applied where mistakes can be corrected without risking international incidents. The camp around you pulses with energy, low, warm, expectant. Smoke drifts in soft spirals. Fires crackle. Horses shuffle. The sky sinks deeper into blue, and stars begin peeking out like curious guests arriving early. Everything is almost ready for the feast. Almost. Which, of course, is when things begin to fall apart. You return to the cauldron you stirred earlier, only to find 3 cooks standing around it, staring into the pot with identical expressions of horror. The stew, beautiful, rich, aromatic stew, is frothing too quickly. Bubbles burst aggressively at the surface, like tiny culinary protests. The senior cook looks at you. Did you stir this counterclockwise? Your blood runs cold. No, I swear. I only stirred clockwise. She narrows her eyes. Are you certain? You nod with the firm desperation of a person who does not want to have their stirring privileges revoked. Another cook leans over the cauldron, sniffs, and announces, "It's overexcited. We need more noodles." Because yes, apparently the solution to overexcited stew is carbohydrates. Crisis number 1 unfolds as several assistants sprint toward the supply wagon to fetch dried noodles. One trips over a sleeping dog, the noodles go flying like brittle confetti, and another assistant dives heroically to catch them mid-air. A handful break, the rest survive. You watch the whole spectacle unfold as if witnessing a very dramatic, very starchy ballet. They dump the noodles into the pot. The stew calms slightly. Crisis number 1, contained. Crisis number 2 arrives immediately on its heels. A pot of fried liver slices destined for nobility begins to smoke. Not the pleasant sizzling smoke that suggests browning and aroma. No, this is black, acrid smoke, the kind that makes you think, "Oh no, we angered a fire spirit." A young cook fans it desperately. "It's burning! It's burning!" she cries, as though this is the worst thing that could ever happen in human history. The older cook sighs dramatically. "Turn the pan down, not up, Kulan. The liver is not an enemy to be defeated." You help scrape the nearly blackened pieces into a bowl. Another cook examines them, grimaces, and mutters, "We'll give these to the generals. They pretend to like everything." That solves that. Crisis number 2, redirected to the generals. But crisis number 3? That one's special. A massive, round bread loaf, intended as the centerpiece for the Khan's table, is being carried out of the baking tent on a large wooden plank. It looks glorious, golden brown, gently crisp, studded with tiny seeds. The cooks beam, the steward beams, you beam, everything is perfect. And then a goat charges out of nowhere. It clips the leg of the assistant holding the plank just a small bump, but at precisely the worst angle. The assistant stumbles forward, arms flailing. The bread goes airborne in a majestic arc that would impress any physicist. Everyone gasps. The bread lands on a pile of reeds, bounces, because apparently everything bounces in this camp, and rolls to a stop at your feet. No one moves. Finally, the steward kneels, picks up the bread, examines it with grave focus, then declares, "It is still worthy." The camp exhales collectively. Crisis 3, miraculously survived. A quirky detail emerges during the cleanup. The goat responsible is now standing proudly nearby, chewing grass with the smug aura of someone who knows no one can punish them because goats answer to no laws, earthly or divine. A cook mutters, "That goat is cursed," and another replies, "No, just opinionated." Crisis number 4 comes from the spice station, where a cook is preparing the very good spice, definitely not too strong. You hear coughing, sneezing, and then outright wailing. You rush over to find a cloud of red powder hanging in the air like an angry spirit. A man stands in the center of it, eyes watering violently. "I just barely opened the jar," he croaks. "Barely." The steward yanks him out. Close it before someone loses their nose." Another cook slams the lid shut and buries the jar under a cloth, as though it might grow legs and cause further chaos. "Do not let that touch the Khan's bowl," the steward warns, "unless he specifically requests enlightenment." Crisis number 4, contained and reburied. You step back, adjusting your apron, which is more symbolic than functional at this point, and take stock of the mayhem. Every disaster has been handled, sort of, mostly. The stew is stable. The liver is realigned to the general's menu. The bread is intact, albeit slightly grass-scented. The spice jar is back in its lair. But then, crisis number 5 slinks into view. A camel wanders into the dairy tent. Again. Only this time, it is not content to simply sit down. No, it leans its long neck over a barrel of airag, takes one sniff, and knocks it over with the casual confidence of someone flipping a chessboard because they don't like where the game is going. Airag spills everywhere. Cooks shriek in dismay. The camel stares at the spreading puddle like, "Yes, this is correct." You and 3 others scramble to right the barrel while the steward massages his temples. "Why do camels hate dairy?" he mutters. "What happened in their childhood?" Someone mentions the spare airag barrel stored behind the cauldron. The steward breathes a sigh of relief. Good. Tonight is saved. Crisis number 5. Mopped up. Finally, the steward gathers the entire team together. "Listen," he says, voice calm but firm. "No more surprises. No more accidents. No more animals in the kitchen." At the moment, a chicken runs through the clearing, carrying something shiny in its beak. Everyone freezes. The steward sighs. "I don't want to know. Someone just fix it." You help 2 assistants corner the chicken, retrieve a stolen spoon, and preserve whatever dignity remains in this place. And yet, despite the disasters, the smoke, the spilled dairy, the overly dramatic breads, and the poultry-related theft, something amazing happens as the sky turns dark. The food starts looking beautiful. The stew thickens into a glossy, fragrant masterpiece. The roasted meats glisten with melted butter, shiny enough to impress even the pickiest noble. The teas are hot and steady. The bowls are arranged with precision. The breads are golden. The spices used sparingly sing with warmth. The camp shifts from chaos to readiness, like a storm cloud settling into a still, glassy lake. The steward looks at you tired, a little smoky, and fundamentally proud. "You survived the kitchen," he says softly. "Now comes the harder part." You swallow. Serving the great Khan awaits. By the time the last air rag spill is mopped and the rogue chicken has been divested of its stolen cutlery, the camp settles into a new rhythm, one softer, more theatrical, threaded with anticipation. Fires glow brighter against the dark sky. Shadows dance on the felt walls of yurts. Conversations quiet down into murmurs. Somewhere, a 2-stringed instrument begins to hum a tune that feels half lullaby, half prelude. "The entertainers are gathering," the steward says, gesturing toward a circle near the grand yurt. "Come. You should meet the men and women who will keep the Khan amused while you try not to drop anything." You raise an eyebrow. "I thought I was here to help with food." "You are," he says with a straight face. "But if the performers fail, the food will not save the evening. And if the food fails, the performers will refuse to save you." You're not sure if he's joking. You follow him into a clearing where a group of entertainers prepares for the feast with the seriousness of scholars before an exam. A fire crackles in the center, illuminating faces smeared with ash or paint, some subtle, some bold. Drummers tighten hides over wooden frames. Storytellers whisper last-minute lines to themselves. A contortionist casually folds into a shape your spine would absolutely file a complaint about. A man with a lute-like instrument called a morin kur smiles at you. Its carved horsehead ornament gleams in the firelight. "You look nervous," he says kindly. "Good. The Khan likes his servants alert." You are not comforted. A factual detail drifts in naturally. Mongol feasts traditionally included entertainers, musicians, dancers, storytellers, acrobats, even throat singers whose voices resonated like wind reverberating inside ancient caverns. These performances were more than simple entertainment. They reinforced cultural identity, honored victories, soothed tensions, and sometimes conveyed political messages. Historians still argue whether the Khan preferred comedic tales or heroic epics, but everyone agrees he demanded skill. The steward nudges you toward a group of storytellers sitting cross-legged in the grass. They look like they're preparing for battle, whispering lines, adjusting beads, clearing throats dramatically. One elder storyteller, his beard braided and tipped with bronze rings, gestures for you to sit. "You have the eyes of someone who fears causing offense," he says. You sit instantly. "I'm serving the Khan tonight." He nods sagely. "Ah, the most honorable and most terrifying job." Then he leans closer. "Tell me, can you pour tea without shaking?" You hesitate. He sighs. "We will pray for your steadiness." Another storyteller laughs softly. "Don't worry. The Khan rarely punishes servers for shaking. But inaccurate storytelling?" He clicks his tongue. "Unforgivable." They all nod gravely. You suddenly feel grateful that your job doesn't involve reciting epics from memory. One woman begins vocal warm-ups, producing sounds so deep and resonant you nearly drop your bowl. You've heard of Mongolian throat singing before, but hearing it firsthand is something else, like the earth itself humming. The steward whispers, "This will open the feast." It honors the spirits. You nod, goosebumps rising along your arms. Nearby, a pair of acrobats practice flips off the back of a wooden crate. Their movements are fluid, precise, almost impossible. They land silently, as if the air padded their fall. One performs a handstand so stable you suspect witchcraft. They perform after the first course, the steward explains. Keep the generals from falling asleep, or from starting arguments. Makes sense. Then you notice something truly quirky. Two comedians, yes, Mongol court comedians, sit beside a tiny fire roasting. You guessed it, dried curds. They giggle as they snack. One says, "My joke tonight is about a camel who refuses. Tribute." The other replies, "If you mention camels, the Khan will expect it to be funny. Are you ready for that pressure?" "We shall find out," the first says dramatically, lifting his roasted curd as though proposing a toast. You ask the steward, "The Khan likes humour?" He nods. "When it's good. Very good. Otherwise, he stares silently." You shudder. A silent Khan feels worse than an angry one. The musicians begin tuning their instruments, some plucked, some bowed, some struck. Drummers test rhythms. The fire cracks. The night air hums. You notice each performer reviewing their material with genuine intensity. A young storyteller asks the elder, "Should I tell the tale of the boy who became a wolf?" The elder shakes his head. "Too dramatic. Tonight needs something gentle. Maybe the story of the wandering moon spirit." "Too sad." "Then what?" The elder sighs. "A tale that lets the Khan rest his mind, but not fall asleep." You admire the precision of that requirement. You don't envy their job. Historians still debate the exact stories told in Mongol feasts, but fragments survive tales of clever foxes, proud horses, wandering spirits, tricksters, ancient heroes, and quiet moments beneath the steppe sky. Stories designed not to excite or alarm, but to soothe, while still stirring a spark of curiosity. Tonight's performers clearly feel the weight of that tradition. A small boy runs into the circle holding a drum twice his size. "I want to play," he announces boldly. The crowd chuckles. An older musician pats his head. "Maybe next year. Tonight, you carry the sticks." The boy beams with pride, as if the sticks themselves hold ancient power. One performer steps toward you, a woman with bright eyes and long braided hair. She taps your arm. "If you need help remembering who gets served next, listen for the cues in our music. We play in patterns. Each rhythm shift signals a serving round." You blink. "You mean the feast is synchronized with music?" She grins. "Of course. You think we do chaos here?" "No. We do art." You suddenly feel as if you've wandered into a secret society disguised as a dinner. As the final preparations near completion, performers take their positions. Musicians sit in a crescent. Storytellers gather behind them. Acrobats stretch. Comedians rehearse their camel joke one last time. The elder storyteller raises his hands. Instantly, silence sweeps across the clearing. Clean, crisp, absolute. Even the wind seems to still. He looks at you. "Tonight," he says softly, "you serve the Khan. We serve the soul." The moment hangs in the air like a drawn breath. Then he lowers his hands, and the first low, resonant hum of throat singing vibrates across the steppe. The feast has officially begun. The first waves of throat singing roll across the camp, deep, layered tones that seem to rise from the earth itself. The air shivers. Fires flicker in response, their flames dancing like they're listening. The feast is beginning, and with it comes the part no one warned you about: feeding the army. The steward steps beside you, his face lit by the glow of torches. "Come," he says. "Before the Khan eats, the troops must. Hungry soldiers make restless nights." You follow him away from the performers and toward the outer edge of the camp, where long rows of warriors sit or squat beside fires. Their armor glints under the stars. Their horses stand tied behind them, munching calmly as if they know their riders are being fed a step above field rations tonight. The scale hits you slowly, row after row after row of men preparing for bowls, plates, ladles, and hot broth. Some polish their bows as they wait. Others sharpen knives or braid their horse's mane. Some lie back, staring at the sky like they're counting constellations instead of scars. But all of them are waiting for food. This, the steward says gently, is the other half of the feast, the one that keeps the empire moving. A factual detail drifts naturally into place. Mongol armies were legendary not just because of their speed and skill, but because of their shockingly efficient supply lines. While European armies struggled with grain, bread, or spoiled meat, Mongol soldiers traveled with herds, dried curds, fermented milk, dried meat, and broth concentrates. Their diet was compact, powerful, and portable. Historians still argue whether this diet contributed directly to their endurance, but no one disputes that Mongol troops could ride farther and fight longer than almost any other medieval force. Tonight, though, they get fresh food. The cooks set up large serving stations, giant cauldrons positioned in a semicircle, their steam drifting upward like offerings to the night. Bowls clack together, ladles splash. Freshly roasted meat sizzles as it's cut open, juices dripping into waiting trays. The aroma is mouth-watering, savory, smoky, rich, with herbs gathered from a dozen places you can't pronounce. Warriors rise and form lines, not a chaotic rush, but a smooth, practiced movement. Each line corresponds to a unit, each unit to a commander, each commander to a number of bowls required. It's organized, calm, unnervingly so, like a military drill disguised as dinner. One warrior catches your eye. His face is deeply lined, his hair tied back in a tight knot. He nods at you approvingly. You nod back. The exchange feels important in a way you don't fully understand. A young soldier approaches with a wide grin. "First feast?" he asks. "First everything, you admit." He laughs. "Don't worry, we only riot if the stew tastes weak." You smile nervously. He isn't joking. You can tell. Several assistants carry the large tubs marked with symbols. You remember them from earlier. Horsehead symbol for high-fat warrior portions, spear symbol for elite guards, knot symbol for veteran units. Everything is handed, out with pattern and precision, almost a language of bowls. The steward hands you a ladle. You serve this line. You freeze. Me, yes you. They're just soldiers, not the Khan. They won't stare at you like stone statues if you spill. That helps? Slightly? You brace yourself and begin ladling stew into bowls. The warriors accept their servings with nods, muttered thanks, or approving grunts. One man inhales deeply and announces, "Good stew." The entire line hears it. You nearly faint from relief. A quirky moment unfolds as a warrior asks for extra onions. You lean toward the pot to scoop some, but a cook grabs your wrist. "No," she says sternly. "Extra onions go only to the left-handed archers tonight." You stare blankly. She leans closer. Left-handed archers are complaining too much. Onion bribery calms them. You nod as if this is perfectly reasonable. You no longer question anything. A group of young warriors begins a debate nearby about whether falcons or eagles make better hunting companions. The argument grows passionate. One insists eagles have more dignity. Another points out that falcons fly faster. A third says, "I had a hawk once who stole my lunch, so none of them can be trusted." The others nod in agreement. This is perhaps the most Mongol argument in history. As you continue serving, you notice how the soldiers eat. Quickly, efficiently, with gratitude, but without ceremony. They share bowls, pass bread, trade bits of meat, laugh between mouthfuls. A few sit quietly, savoring the warmth rising through their hands. Somewhere behind you, a commander tastes a piece of roasted meat, nods, and announces, "Good enough to ride tomorrow." Everyone around him cheers. The steward sighs. Soldiers measure cuisine by battle readiness. Historians still argue whether Mongol warriors truly preferred simple food or whether they simply accepted whatever was available. Watching them now, you suspect they simply appreciated function over luxury. Then you see something that makes your heart warm unexpectedly. A young warrior, barely older than a boy, holds his bowl toward an elderly man sitting beside him. "Take this," the boy says. "I can wait for the next round." The elder accepts it with a small nod, eyes softened by gratitude. The steward leans in. "Family controls the horde," he whispers. "Food deepens loyalty." Eventually, the last bowls are filled. The warriors settle into satisfied groups. Some lean back against saddles. Others share stories or sing low songs. A few polish their weapons with full bellies and sleepy eyes. And then, almost like a signal, the entire area falls into a gentle quiet. Warriors breathe deeply. Fires crackle softly. The scent of roasted meat lingers in the air like a warm echo. The steward touches your elbow. Good work, he says quietly. You fed the backbone of the empire. You glance over the sea of soldiers, hundreds of men, warmed, satisfied, re-centered by this feast. You'd expected the chaos of an army. But instead, you see something peaceful, grounded, human. Ready? The steward asks. For what? He nods toward the grand yurt, glowing like a beacon. For feeding the Khan. Your heartbeat quickens. The warriors are done. The generals are waiting. The entertainers are humming. The food is perfected. Now you walk into the firelight. And the next bowl you carry won't be for just anyone. You walk with the steward back toward the glowing heart of the camp, the grand yurt rising like a pale moon against the dark steppe sky. The air is warmer here, thick with the scent of roasting meats, spiced broth, and something sweeter honey, maybe, or the faint fragrance of rosewater from the Persian caravan. The noises of the soldiers fade behind you until all you hear is the soft pulse of drums, the distant hum of throat singing, and your own heartbeat doing a nervous tap dance. Stay close, the steward says, holding a pouch of spices tight against his chest. This part gets delicate. You swallow. Delicate how? He exhales slowly. Because everything here must taste like power. You're not sure whether that's a metaphor or a safety warning. Near the entrance of the grand yurt, a long table is arranged with rows of small jars, bundles of herbs, and bowls of mysterious powders. This is the spice station, not the chaotic, sneeze-inducing one you encountered earlier, but the real one, the place where the flavors for the Khan's food are finalized. A woman sits at the head of the table, her posture straight, her clothing immaculate. When she lifts a spoon to taste the broth, everyone watches her expression as if their careers depend on it. They probably do. She is the Khan's master taster. She sees you and gives a curt nod. Bring what you gathered. You hand over the spices you carried from the caravans. Saffron threads from Persia, dried mushrooms from the eastern traders, small bundles of thyme and sage, rosewater, fennel seeds. She arranges them like puzzle pieces, evaluating their scents with closed eyes and long, thoughtful breaths. This, she says, lifting a pinch of saffron, is for the Khan's rice. This, she adds, touching a dried mushroom, for the broth. And this, she taps the dish of fennel seeds for the nobles. Then she picks up a tiny pouch of unknown brown powder. She sniffs it. Her eyebrows rise sharply. Where did you get this? The steward coughs softly. From a trader who claimed it would please the Khan. She stares at the pouch with deep suspicion. It smells like a spell gone wrong. You lean closer. Is it dangerous? She sighs. Only if you enjoy staying alive. A factual detail slips in smoothly. While Mongols used relatively simple seasonings, salt, onions, garlic, and herbs, their exposure to vast territories meant they sometimes adopted exotic spices in feasts meant for elites. These spices traveled immense distances via caravan routes, prized for flavor, rarity, and perceived medicinal properties. Historians still argue whether the Mongols truly valued spices or simply displayed them as status symbols. Watching this master taster weigh every grain like a diplomatic decision, you suspect both are true. She hands the pouch back to the steward. Bury that in the ground, she says, and pray it doesn't crawl out. You comply. Next, the taster begins adding spices to small bowls of broth, adjusting each with the precision of a mathematician checking equations. A pinch here, a drop there, a swirl, a sniff, a micro-sip. Her assistant scribbles notes on a flat plank of wood. You peek over his shoulder only to find swirling marks and symbols you cannot decipher. Later, the steward explains these aren't words, they're tasting patterns, a code only the kitchen elites understand. A quiet alarm rings through the blowjons, station when a young assistant accidentally knocks over a bowl of fennel seeds. They scatter everywhere, rolling across the table like tiny, guilty marbles. The taster glares. Pick. Every. One. You help gather the runaway fennel with the solemnity of a monk collecting sacred relics. A quirky moment arises when a storyteller wanders too close, inhaling the spice-scented air. Is that saffron? He asks, delighted. No, the steward says quickly. Yes, the taster says sharply. It depends who is asking, the assistant explains. You decide to step back. The taster picks up a jar of honey next, dribbling a thin stream across a bowl of hot tea. She swirls it, inhales deeply, and begins a soft incantation, not a religious one, but a poetic recitation describing fields, rivers, summer winds, and horses. You glance at the steward. He whispers, "Some believe spices respond to words. Poetry warms the flavors." Historians still argue whether this was superstition, artistry, or simply good performance. But in this moment, watching her coax flavors with gentle verses, it feels like all three. Suddenly, a man bursts into the spice station, clutching a bundle of herbs that look wilted. "We have trouble," he announces. "The mint has dried too much." The taster gasps. Several cooks clutch their chests. Someone whispers, "Without mint, the dessert will taste lonely." Another murmurs, "Spirits hate dessert without mint." You don't know what that means, but everyone looks genuinely distressed. The taster fixes the man with a stare sharp enough to slice onions at 10 paces. "Where," she demands, "is the fresh mint?" He swallows. "A goat ate it. You freeze." The steward freezes. Half the cooks gasp. "That goat," the steward whispers, "is going to start a rebellion." But the taster simply sighs, rummages through her spice crates, and retrieves a tiny jar. "We use this instead," she says. You ask, "What is?" She replies, "Something better than mint." She taps the jar. "If anyone asks, it is mint." Problem solved. Next comes the most chaotic moment of the evening, the spice test. The taster prepares 3 versions of the broth, one mild, one herbal, one rich. A group of cooks gathers around her in tense silence. She raises a spoon from each bowl and lets a single drop fall back into the liquid. They hiss softly. She nods. Satisfied, she hands you 1 spoon. Taste. You immediately regret being born. The broth is so intensely flavored it feels like your tongue is taking a pilgrimage across the Silk Road. You cough. The taster frowns. Too powerful. Drop it 1 notch. An assistant dilutes the mixture. You taste again. Perfect. Warm. Balanced. Comforting. The kind of broth that could convince a conqueror to sit down and rest for a moment. The taster smiles, a rare, fleeting thing. "This," she says softly, "will please the Khan." She sets the bowls aside for final serving. The steward turns to you. "We're done here." "Done?" you ask. He nods toward the grand yurt, blazing with torchlight. "Now we prepare the final setting." His voice drops to a whisper. The Khan is waiting. Night folds fully over the steppe as you and the steward approach the grand yurt, now glowing like a lantern in the dark. Its felt walls ripple gently in the evening wind, torchlight flickering across the embroidered patterns that mark it as the seat of unimaginable authority. Everything feels quieter here, not silent, but reverent. Even the crackle of the fires seems to soften as you near the threshold. "This is where the mood changes," the steward murmurs. "The world gets smaller, the shadows get thicker, and every movement matters." You exhale slowly, as if steadying yourself before stepping onto a stage. The entrance of the yurt is draped with heavy felt panels, dyed deep red and trimmed with wolf fur. 2 guards stand on either side, spears in hand, eyes sharp enough to trim wool from a sheep at 50 paces. As you approach, they track you instinctively, not threatening, just measuring. One raises a hand. "Food bearer?" You nod. He steps aside. Inside, the air is warm, perfumed with incense, butter lamps, and the combined scents of roasted meat and simmering broth. The ceiling curves high above you, supported by wooden latticework that glows like honey under the firelight. Ropes cross overhead in elegant spirals, the smoke rising through the central opening like a slow sigh into the night sky. And the first thing you notice? The shadows. They cling to the edges of the yurt, pooling like quiet pools of ink. Figures sit tucked within them, nobles, guards, advisors, faces half lit, half hidden. The low murmur of their conversation blends into a soothing hum, almost hypnotic. You suddenly understand why this feast is called the Nightfall Gathering. Everything about this space encourages the mind to soften, unwind, drift. But at the center of it all, elevated slightly above everyone else, sits the Great Khan's seat. No throne, no gold, no gemstones. Just a raised platform covered in heavy rugs, draped with simple furs, adorned with the quiet confidence of a man who does not need ostentatious symbols to show his power. A low table in front of it gleams with polished wood, reflecting the fire's glow. You're allowed only a fleeting glance at the Khan himself, broad-shouldered, wrapped in layered robes, posture relaxed but commanding, face in shadow. He does not speak, he does not gesture, he simply exists with the force of a mountain. And your pulse jumps because somehow you're supposed to bring him food. The steward nudges you. First, placement, he whispers. Each bowl goes exactly where it must. The servers move with a slow, deliberate grace, setting down the bowls, plates, and cups in perfect alignment. It feels like watching a living ritual. No clatter, no mistakes. Even their breaths seem coordinated. Your part is simple. Carry a tray of supporting dishes, herbed broth, noodles, dried curds, pickled vegetables from the caravans, and place them in a semicircle around the Khan's main bowl. But simple does not mean easy. The tray is heavy, your hands tremble, and the floor feels uneven under your feet. One step, another, slow, don't spill, don't breathe weirdly, don't faint. A warrior kneeling beside the Khan glances at you with curiosity. For a moment, you think he might whisper encouragement. He does not. He simply continues observing, perhaps evaluating whether you belong in this sacred space. No pressure. A factual detail flows naturally into the moment. Mongol court etiquette emphasized subtle gestures, quiet confidence, and deliberate motion. Everything from serving food to offering drink had symbolic weight. A misplaced bowl could be considered careless. A loud gesture, disrespectful. Historians still argue whether this strict etiquette was uniform under all Khans, but in this yurt, you feel its truth like a physical force in the air. You reach the low table and kneel, placing the dishes one by one. The polished wood reflects your trembling hands, and you hope no one sees. The Khan doesn't move, but something in the air shifts acknowledgement, perhaps, or simply the gravity of proximity. Then, as you finish placing the final bowl, a quirky detail unfolds. A small child, no more than 5 years old, quietly pads into the yurt carrying a small plate of honey cakes. He sets them in front of the Khan with absolute confidence, then glances at you and grins like your co-conspirators. The steward leans toward you. His grandson, he whispers, allowed to break every rule. The boy sticks out his tongue at a guard on his way out. The guard rolls his eyes. The tension in your chest loosens slightly. Further inside, the entertainers begin arranging themselves in quiet anticipation. A storyteller kneels, flipping through mental pages of ancient tales. Musicians tune string instruments with feather-like plucks. A throat singer tests a low note that vibrates through your bones. The lights dim slightly as the butter lamps are adjusted, casting longer, softer shadows. The air becomes thicker, warmer, almost dreamlike, like the yurt itself is exhaling, preparing for the night's unfolding. The steward nudges you again. Now, he whispers. We wait. And so you kneel at the edge of the serving circle, breathing slowly, letting the warmth wrap around you. Outside, drums pulse softly. Inside, the quiet gathers like a deep pool, swirling gently as the first performers step forward. Your heart slows, your thoughts drift. The feast has begun, and you are inside the center of the Empire's heartbeat, half participant, half spectator, entirely enchanted. The air inside the grand yurt shifts subtle, but unmistakable, as the music softens into a low, resonant hum. You feel the change, the way you feel a gust of cold air before a storm. A signal passes silently among the guards, the musicians, the attendants. It's time. The Khan is ready to be served. You're not sure how you know. No one announces it. No drum sounds. No herald steps forward. Instead, it's the absence of movement that speaks. Every person in the yurt, from the tallest warrior to the smallest child lingering near the doorway, becomes perfectly still. A bowl of broth is placed into your hands. The steward leans in so close you can feel the whisper brush your ear. Carry this to the Khan. Set it before him. Slowly. The bowl touches the table before your knees touch the floor. Do not look directly at him unless he speaks. Your pulse is louder than the drums outside. You rise onto your knees, gripping the bowl gently but firmly. The steam curls upward like a shy spirit, releasing the scents you spent all day, preparing bone, herbs, a hint of dried mushroom, a touch of salt that had to be perfect. The broth glows amber in the firelight. It feels heavier than it should. Symbolic weight tends to do that. You begin your approach. Each movement is deliberate, controlled. Your body knows the stakes, even if your mind feels a bit numb. A server to your left trembles slightly and corrects his hand position, Another wipes a bead of sweat from her brow. But you keep going. The Khan sits motionless on his platform, a living mountain of calm authority. His robes ripple with threads of red and gold. Shadows cling to the edges of his face, making his eyes difficult to read. But the room is tuned to him, breathing with him, waiting for him. You place one hand beneath the bowl, the other steadying the rim. You approach the low table and lower the bowl. The wooden surface accepts it with a soft, warm tap. A factual detail settles naturally into the moment. Mongol rulers valued calmness during meals. No sudden gestures, no unnecessary conversation. Feasting was not only nourishment, it was a display of discipline, dignity, and authority. Historians still argue whether this etiquette originated from steppe traditions or from influences absorbed during conquest. Tonight, watching the ritual unfold, it feels deeply rooted, ancient, steady, intentional. You kneel back slowly. The Khan lifts his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the presence of food, just enough that you feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken customs pressing down on your shoulders. And then just when your nerves begin to settle, a quirky detail threatens to undo you. The Khan's favorite hound, an enormous shaggy dog with a permanent expression of sleepy wisdom, suddenly pads across the yurt floor. No one stops it. No one even flinches. It circles the Khan once, sits beside him, sniffs the bowl of broth, and yawns at the exact volume of a small thunderclap. The Khan places a calming hand on the dog's head. You exhale without realizing it. The steward whispers. The dog approves. This is good. Next comes the tea. Another server carries it forward. You recognize the bowl, the spiraled carving, the deeper lip, the one reserved only for the Khan. The server's steps are so smooth they barely disturb the air. He places the bowl perfectly. Not a drop spills. And then something small, barely noticeable happens. The Khan nods. Just once. Slightly. But the room relaxes like a tight bowstring released. Shoulders drop, breaths return. A few servants exchange quick looks of relief. His silent expectations, the steward whispers, are the loudest sound in this place. The Khan finally lifts his bowl. You watch, mesmerized, as he takes the first sip of tea, a slow, contemplative taste. Not rushed, not idle, meaningful. His expression doesn't change, but the simple fact that he takes a second sip sends a ripple of satisfaction through the entire yurt. The feast may continue. Courtiers begin receiving their bowls. Generals are served next. Wives, children, nobles. Everything timed. Everything in precise order. The music shifts slightly with each rhythm to signal the next round of serving. You begin assisting with the supporting dishes, floating between the outer ring of attendants and the inner circle of nobles. You place noodles, breads, curds, vegetables, each in the correct sequence, in the correct bowl shape, with the correct hand movements. And although your nerves are buzzing, there's a strange comfort in the ritual. The rhythm, the softness of sound, the fire glow reflecting off bowls, the low murmur of polite conversation, the scent of warm broth weaving through the air like a gentle spell. But then, because fate enjoys drama, one small hiccup surfaces. A nobleman frowns at his bowl. You glance at the steward in horror, whispering, "What's wrong?" He squints. His broth has. He inhales. One too many onions. You panic. "What do we do?" He sighs. "We remove one onion." You blink. "How?" He gestures. A server steps forward with elegant precision, reaches into the bowl with 2 slender chopsticks, plucks out the offending onion slice, and bows. Crisis averted. Historians still debate whether Mongol nobility were truly this picky, or whether feast etiquette simply made them feel powerful enough to demand tiny corrections. Watching this onion extraction of diplomacy, you suspect, absolutely yes, they were that picky. The Khan continues eating in serene silence. You settle into your role, placing dishes, adjusting trays, ensuring nothing spills, overcooks, or cools too quickly. The atmosphere becomes hypnotic, drumbeats steady, flames flickering, performers preparing in the background. And in that soft darkness, something shifts inside you. Fear drifts away. Panic dissolves. What remains is focus, quiet, smooth, steady. You are no longer just participating. You are part of the ritual. The Khan's expectations feel less like threats and more like a steady heartbeat guiding the room. You sense the meal flowing toward its midpoint, the moment when the Khan may speak, gesture, or simply breathe in a way that signals the next stage. And as you kneel beside the steward, waiting for that signal, you realize something. You're no longer terrified. You're honored. The feast is deepening. The night is thickening. And soon, the most delicate moment of all will arrive. When dishes go wrong, the yurt hums with a gentle equilibrium, warm light, settled shadows, rhythmic music, and the steady clinking of bowls. It feels as though the feast has reached that rare sweet spot where nothing could possibly go wrong. Which, of course, is exactly when the universe decides to test your optimism. The steward leans slightly toward you. "Stay sharp," he whispers. "This is the part where small mistakes grow fangs." You nod, though you're not entirely sure what that means. A group of servers gently places the next round of dishes before the circle of nobles. One bowl of roasted liver slices, one of seasoned noodles from the Eastern caravan, a smaller bowl of mushrooms, softened in broth. Everything seems perfect, until it isn't. A nobleman near the front freezes, mid-bite. His expression still's not angry, not offended, but assessing, which is somehow worse. He glances at his bowl, then at the server, then at the steward. You feel a chill crawl up the back of your neck. He lifts his spoon and taps the rim. Not loudly, not aggressively, just twice. A soft, polite tap-tap. The entire yurt reacts like he set off a signal flare. The steward inhales sharply. Ah, the flavor is wrong. You panic. Wrong how? Too salty? Too bland? Too... Hush, he says, watching intently. We must interpret the tap. You blink. The tap? He explains. 2 taps means, I am displeased, but I have not yet identified why. 1 tap is too much fat. 3 taps is too little salt. 4 taps is, you're telling me there's a tap language? He nods gravely. A very old one. Before you can process this insanity, the nobleman dips his spoon again, tastes, frowns deeper, and taps 2 more times. You whisper, "That means?" The steward rubs his temples. He still doesn't know what's wrong. Wonderful. A low murmur passes through nearby nobles. Some lean in to sniff his dish. One claims he smells bitterness. Another insists the noodles are too firm. A third dramatically announces, the broth lacks soul. Historians still argue whether Mongol nobles were genuinely sensitive to subtle flavors, or simply enjoyed performing culinary criticism as a social sport. Judging by this scene, you suspect the second. The steward gestures for the master taster. She glides to the nobleman, takes his bowl, and sniffs it with professional indifference. Then she tastes. Her eyebrows rise a millimeter. "Ah," she says softly. "It is missing wind herb." You blink. "Wind? Herb?" She nods. "Very rare, very subtle. Smells like a storm, tastes like calm." You look at the steward, who gives a helpless shrug. "Don't worry. It's just wild thyme." A server rushes to retrieve a pouch of the herb. It's sprinkled gently over the dish. The nobleman tastes again, nods once, and the yurt relaxes. Crisis averted. But only briefly, because not 1 minute later, a different noblewoman suddenly stiffens, her eyes wide. She points silently at her bowl. The steward pales. "Oh no," you whisper. "What? What now?" He whispers back. "She found a floating. Something." Your heart drops. "What something?" He leans in. A droplet of fat in the wrong shape. You stare. That's a thing?" He nods gravely. She believes shapes carry omens. And indeed, the noblewoman looks horrified, as if a demon personally RSVP'd into her soup. She sets the bowl down carefully, as though the droplet might hatch legs and sprint away. The master taster swoops in again. One glance, one stir, one decisive nod. "It is merely fat," she announces. "Not an omen, not a sign, a normal drop." She scoops it out. The noblewoman exhales dramatically, wiping her brow. Across the yurt, a general mutters to another, "I once found a fat droplet shaped like a wolf. It was a good year." His friend nods. "And I found one shaped like a saddle saw. Terrible year." Historians still argue whether Mongol elite believed in droplet divination or whether this was just fashionable superstition. Either way, you are now deeply afraid of soup. But the true crisis arrives when a server presents the Khan's roasted meat platter. Perfectly browned, beautiful sheen, butter-brushed, aromatic. The Khan lifts a slice, pauses, tilts his head slightly, and sets it back down. A collective freeze swallows the room. The steward's breath catches in his chest. "Be calm," he murmurs. "Be calm, be calm, be calm." He steps forward, bows deeply, and offers a replacement slice. The Khan lifts this new slice, tastes, chews, and nods. The yurt breathes again. You whisper, "What was wrong with the first?" The steward answers quietly, "Too cold." You blink. "Cold? But it was just roasted." He gestures toward a nervous assistant holding the platter. He walked too slowly. The assistant visibly shrinks. The steward pats his shoulder. "Don't worry. Walk faster next time. Or warmer." Then comes a moment that might have ended you if it happened 5 minutes earlier. As servers place the sweet dishes, honey cakes, dried fruits, caramelized nuts, someone drops a bowl. It hits the rug. Softly. No spill. No sound. No break. The steward looks at it. The server looks at it. The Khan looks at it. You stop breathing. Then the Khan's dog walks over, sniffs the unbroken bowl, licks it once, and sits down triumphantly. The Khan chuckles. Actually chuckles. The tension collapses into relief. The steward leans toward you. "The dog saves us again," he sighs. It is said the Khan trusts that dog more than most of his advisors. You nod. Understandable. The final dish is placed. The final drink poured. The final stray, droplet eliminated. The yurt settles into a soft, contented rhythm. The steward touches your elbow. "You've survived the hardest part," he whispers. You exhale. Your hands stop shaking. Your heartbeat slows. But the feast isn't over. Not yet. Because once the dishes are right, once the flavors align, once the nobles quiet down, a deeper softness arrives. A shift. A dimming. A dissolve. The moment before the feast melts into its dreamy, drowsy conclusion. And that is where the night is heading next. The worst is over. At least, that's what you tell yourself as the yurt drifts into a softer, slower rhythm, like the entire structure is exhaling after holding its breath through all the tiny crises of the feast. The fires burn lower now, glowing with a warm, buttery light. The shadows deepen, soften, and stretch lazily across the rugs. Musicians shift into gentler melodies, soft plucks, quiet drums, breathy flutes that sound like wind wandering through tall grass. The Khan rests back slightly in his seat, not slouching, never that, but easing, letting his weight settle into the furs. His hound curls at his feet like a large, furry punctuation mark, and the nobles, once upright and hawk-eyed, now sink into comfortable conversation, movements slower, eyelids heavier. The feast is dissolving gently, deliberately into its final form. You retreat with the steward to the outer circle of servers, placing your tray down with more confidence than you felt an hour ago. Your hands no longer tremble. The fear of tapping bowls, rogue onion slices, suspicious fat droplets, or sudden camel incursions has faded. For the first time since arriving at this camp, you can simply watch. And what you see feels almost dreamlike. Generals sit in small clusters, recounting something softly: battles, hunts, old riddles, you can't tell. A group of advisors gestures at a map, but not with their usual intensity. They're tracing rivers lazily, like they're telling stories instead of planning conquests. A pair of noble women exchange jokes, giggling behind their sleeves. A little girl curls up beside her mother, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of honey cake. And the musicians play with a gentleness that feels like warm sand slipping through your fingers. The strings hum lightly, a flute whispers, a low drum thumps in slow, spaced intervals like a heartbeat drifting toward sleep. The steward leans toward you. "This is the dissolve," he says. The moment after hunger but before dreams. You tilt your head. Does it happen every feast? He nods. If the food was good, if the music was right, if no goat caused diplomatic harm, yes. The atmosphere is thick with contentment. It feels peaceful, grounded, like the whole empire has become a single, drowsy family under one shared roof. From the other side of the yurt, a storyteller steps forward quietly, without fanfare, and begins reciting a soft tale. Not the dramatic type from earlier, but one meant to soothe full stomachs and wandering minds. His voice is low and rhythmic. You don't catch every word, but the tone carries you anyway. A factual detail drifts in seamlessly. Mongol feasts often ended with quiet storytelling legends, parables, ancestral memories. These final stories weren't meant to thrill but to settle the spirit. Historians still argue whether this tradition served spiritual, political, or simply social purposes. Watching it now, you understand. It's all three: calming the heart, reinforcing unity, and easing everyone toward rest. The tale continues something about a fox who outwitted winter, or maybe a star that guided lost travelers. You're not fully sure. Your mind begins to drift in the soft, warm air. Across the yurt, one of the acrobats from earlier lies on her back, staring at the smoke hole in the ceiling. She wiggles her fingers in the rising smoke like she's painting with it. Near her, one of the comedic storyteller's curd roaster from before slumps against a pillow, half asleep. He mumbles, "My camel joke was acceptable," then promptly dozes off. A general nearby snores softly. His companions smirk but don't wake him. The Khan remains alert but relaxed, his focus drifting as he listens to the final story. His dog now sleeps beside him, tail twitching occasionally, as if dreaming of chasing stubborn goats. The steward taps your arm. "Look," he whispers, pointing subtly. Outside the yurt, through the doorway flap, you glimpse the night sky, an ocean of stars so bright it hurts your eyes. The Milky Way spills across the heavens like a pale river. The camp fires outside glow like scattered lanterns. Men sit with their backs against their horses, whispering or humming along to the faint music leaking from the yurt. The entire empire, just for this moment, feels gentle. A quirky detail emerges as an elderly noble suddenly stands, stretches, and declares proudly, "This stew reminded me of my mother's cooking. She burned everything, but with love." No one knows how to respond, so they nod solemnly. Another nobleman, already half asleep, nods in exaggerated agreement. "Yes, love burns things." Someone snorts loudly. The storyteller pauses, glares, then continues. The steward sighs, amused. "This is what peace looks like," he murmurs. "Messy, sleepy, and full of strange commentary. You breathe in the air warm from bodies and fires, lightly scented with roasted meat and herbs. The haze of contentment settles onto your skin like a blanket. The musicians play the last gentle bars of the evening's melody. Feet shift on rugs, heads tilt back, eyes droop. Even the butter lamps seem to dim themselves. The great, roaring machine of the Mongol Empire, its army, its nobles, its conqueror at the center, sinks slowly into a soft, satisfied quiet. This is the feast's slow dissolve, and in this strange, timeless, shimmering moment, you feel yourself dissolving with it. Not into sleep, not yet, but into the warm exhale of a world at rest. The final story drifts into silence like a candle's last flicker. For a few breaths, no one speaks. The yurt hums with the soft afterglow of food, fire, and tales sliding gently into memory. Even the shadows seem looser now, stretching out like sleepy cats across the rugs. The musicians let their instruments rest in their laps. The flutes lie quiet, the drums cool. The throat singers sip warm tea to smooth the air from their chest to their voice. The steward leans close and whispers, "This is when we leave space for the night to breathe." You kneel quietly beside him, hands resting lightly on your thighs, as attendants move about the room collecting empty bowls with soft, practiced steps. They work slowly, almost timidly, as if reluctant to disturb the calm that has settled over the Khan's gathering. A nobleman sighs contentedly and sinks deeper into a cushion. A woman nearby lifts her daughter into her lap, brushing her hair with slow, absent strokes. A young guard nods off, jerking awake only when his helmet almost slips from his fingers. Even the Khan's hound lies flat on its side now, paws twitching slightly in whatever dream world important dogs visit. The Khan himself sits quietly, arms relaxed, gaze lowered, not asleep, never that, but fully at peace. It's like watching the sky rest before another sunrise, still vast, still powerful, but softened by quiet. The steward taps the ground beside him. "Come," he murmurs. The final moment is outside. You rise carefully, feeling the heaviness of comfort in your limbs. As you step toward the exit, you bow lightly before the Khan, even though no one asked you to. His eyes flick in your direction for a second, barely more than a glance, but something in his posture shifts. Maybe a small acknowledgement, a shared understanding. Then you slip through the felt doorway. Outside, The night air wraps around you like a cool blanket. The stars hover overhead sharp, clear, impossibly bright. Fires crackle softly around the camp. A few soldiers hum, a low tune half remembered from earlier. Horses shuffle, their silhouettes blending with the darkness. The world feels wider but somehow gentler. The steward leads you toward a smaller fire where the storytellers, musicians, acrobats, and cooks gather to unwind. Their faces glow with the warmth of a night well done. One acrobat stretches her arms lazily. "The generals barely blinked tonight," she says proudly. A musician chuckles. "They blinked. I counted at least 4 blinks." A comedian sighs dramatically. "My camel joke landed perfectly." Another storyteller pats his shoulder. It landed. Whether it landed perfectly is debatable. Historians still argue whether Mongol performers critiqued one another after feasts, but tonight their banter feels friendly, gentle, the kind that happens only when the hardest part has passed, and the comfort of the fire softens everyone's edges. You sit with them, letting the warmth seep into your tired knees. Someone hands you a small wooden cup of calming tea, the same sleep tea you saw earlier. A blend of mint, or the not mint substitute, thyme, and something that smells faintly like warm grass. You take a sip. It eases down your throat with a softness that surprises you. The steward sits next to you, rubbing his shoulders with a satisfied sigh. "You survived," he says, quietly. "Better than most first-timers." You smile, finally letting yourself feel the pride you've been too anxious to hold. "I thought I'd ruin everything." He shakes his head. "You did what mattered. You showed care. You followed each rhythm. You tried not to panic." He pauses. "Panic is normal," he adds. "Trying not to panic is the important part." You glance around the camp. The fires breathe. The stars shimmer. The hush of thousands sleeping horses rolls across the night like a quiet tide. It strikes you how deeply connected everything is. Food, stories, rituals, shadows, spices, horses, laughter, silence. The Mongol feast isn't just a meal. It's a whole world breathing together. A soft breeze sweeps through the camp, brushing the grass into long waves. It carries the last traces of roasting meat, honey cakes, and fresh tea. You inhale deeply, letting the scents fill your lungs. The steward leans back on his hands and speaks in a voice barely above a whisper. "Remember this," he says. "Most people think the empire is built on conquest. But it's nights like this, shared food, shared stories, shared peace that hold it together." You feel that truth settle into your chest like a warm ember. You close your eyes for a moment. The night hums. The fires glow. Even the air seems softer, as if it's trying to stay awake, but failing gently. When you open your eyes again, the steward is smiling. "Good," he says. "Now you can rest." You nod, letting your shoulders fall, feeling the last of the tension unwind from your spine. Tonight, you fed the army. You fed the nobles. You fed the Khan. And now the steppe itself feels like it's feeding you silence, safety, softness. In the distance, a final storyteller's voice drifts like a fading ember. And under the wide night sky, all wanderers eventually find a quiet fire. The camp settles deeper into stillness, and you allow yourself to settle with it wrapped in warmth, grounded by the moment, drifting gently towards sleep. And now the camp grows even quieter, almost impossibly quiet, as if the entire world lies wrapped in a single, steady breath. The fires shrink to warm embers. The horses rest with one hoof lightly bent. A faint breeze moves through the grass, slow enough that each blade seems to sway in a dream of its own. You sit there, feeling the softness of the earth beneath you, letting the night settle over your shoulders like a worn, comforting blanket. The last sounds of the feast dissolve into distant murmurs, nothing sharp, nothing bright, just the low, rounded echoes of contentment drifting through the dark. Your body grows heavy in the best way, warm, unhurried, peaceful. The air feels smooth now, almost velvety, as it moves around you. Every inhale comes a little deeper. Every exhale comes a little slower. You feel yourself easing down, relaxing into the rhythm of the steppe, into the quiet pulse of the night. Somewhere, very faintly, a musician plucks one final note, soft as a whisper, and lets it fade into the sky. A storyteller's voice drifts one last time, gentle, lilting, then fades into silence. Nothing presses on you now. Nothing demands your attention. The feast is over, the work is done, and the night asks nothing more of you. Just rest. Just breathe. Let the warmth of the embers wash through you. Let the coolness of the night calm your thoughts. Let the long, open sky cradle whatever remains of the day. And if sleep finds you now as soft and slow as a falling feather, let it take you gently, like the steppe folding into its own quiet dreams. You are safe. You are warm. You can drift.